She didn't cry when he stripped her title. She didn't beg when he pointed at the gates and told her to walk. She just looked at him. Really looked. The way you study something you're about to bury, and she left. No last words, no broken pleas. Just boots on stone and a silence that cut deeper than any howl ever could. That moment? That was the day Alpha Kyle Draven made the worst decision of his life, and the day Seraphine Ashmore began building an empire he'd never be able to touch. Stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where my people are watching from. The announcement came at dusk. Kyle had timed it that way deliberately. Dusk was the hour wolves understood best, the thin membrane between day and dark, when instinct ran loudest and words landed with the weight of stone. He had stood at the top of the assembly yard steps for 17 years, since his father put a sword in his hand and told him, "A ruler speaks once and is never questioned." He had announced wars from these steps. He had named alliances, dissolved marriages, sentenced men to death. The stones under his boots knew the sound of his voice the way the pack knew the smell of his dominance, deep, permanent, non-negotiable. He hadn't accounted for what silence felt like after. The yard held 200 wolves, betas, omegas, senior warriors, the kitchen staff who'd been called to witness because Kyle needed numbers, needed the weight of eyes, needed the moment to be undeniable. He stood straight. He kept his jaw locked. He did not look at her face when he said the words. The bond is severed. The title is revoked. Seraphine Ashmore is no longer Luna of the Moonfang Pack. She leaves before the moon rises. He heard the crowd pull air. Someone in the back made a sound. Not a gasp, something smaller, strangled. And then the yard went into that particular silence that isn't quiet at all but is made entirely of held breath. He still didn't look at her. This is not a punishment, he continued, because the words had been prepared, because he had rehearsed them in his study 3 nights running until they stopped sounding like what they were. This is a correction. The role of Luna requires a certain strength. Moonfang requires that strength now more than ever. What is asked of a Luna in this era cannot be given by someone who, say the rest of it. Her voice came from his left, low, not loud, the kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because it carries its own gravity. He finally looked at her. Seraphine stood exactly where she had been placed, center of the yard, 10 feet from the steps, flanked by 2 of his senior warriors, as protocol demanded for a formal severance. She was dressed in the gray wool she'd worn to the morning meeting, because no one had warned her, because he had not been willing to let the warning leak before the moment was sealed. Her dark hair was loose. She had a shallow cut on her left hand from something that had happened in the training yard 2 days ago, and the bandage was slightly unraveled at the corner, and that small unraveling was the only undone thing about her. "If you're going to call me weak in front of 200 wolves," Seraphine said, "use the word." His second-in-command, Roan, moved a half-step beside him. The subtle shift that meant don't. Kyle didn't need the warning. He was already locked in, already looking at her face, and the thing that was happening in his chest was something he had categorized weeks ago and decided did not qualify as relevant. "The decision is made," Kyle said. "I'm not asking you to reverse it." She didn't raise her chin the way people expected, that performative dignity that looks like courage and is mostly theater. She just stood with her weight evenly distributed and her hands at her sides, and she looked at him like she was reading something written in very small type. "I'm asking you to say what you actually mean, in front of them, since you're so committed to the truth." "Seraphine, you think I'm a liability," she said. It wasn't accusatory, it was flat, the tone of someone naming a thing that exists. "You think the coalition talk scared me. You think I should have stood harder against Elder Corvus and I didn't, and now you've decided that's a pattern and not a moment. That's what this is. So say that. Don't say certain strength like I'm a tool that came with the wrong specifications." The yard was utterly still. Kyle held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then, "The decision is final. You have 2 hours. He watched her take that in, watched her process it the way she processed everything. Not with her face, but somewhere behind it, in the working mechanism that always unsettled him slightly, that made him feel occasionally like she was 3 steps ahead, even when she was standing in front of him with her hands empty. 2 hours, she repeated. Yes, She nodded once. Not submission, something more like confirmation, the small gesture of a person marking coordinates. She did not say another word. She turned and walked, and the crowd split for her automatically, some old instinct in the pack body that had learned over 5 years to move when she moved, and that involuntary parting followed her all the way to the gate. And when the iron lock turned behind her, the sound of it was very loud in Kael's ears. He didn't move for a long time after. Rowan came to stand beside him when the yard had cleared, the way Rowan had been coming to stand beside him for 2 decades when the official business was done and the real conversation could happen. Rowan was 46, built like a siege wall, and had a face that spent most of its time arranged in tactical neutrality. But Kael knew the man's silences, and this one had texture. "You gonna say it, or just stand there breathing loudly?" Kael said. "Nothing to say." Rowan. "She would have been good, Kael." Not harsh, factual, the way a soldier reports terrain. Not soft good, actually good. The coalition talks. Corvus was pushing to see if she'd hold. She held. She held longer than most of the betas in that room. She hesitated. She thought. In negotiations, those are the same thing. Rowan was quiet for a moment. The evening was going gray-blue around the outer walls, the first stars arriving, the kind of still dusk that, in other circumstances, might have been pleasant. "What enemy are you solving for?" Rowan asked. "By sending her out with nothing." Kael looked at the gate, still closed, already closed. "I'm not solving for an enemy," he said. "No," Rowan agreed, and left it there. Was said. Seraphine had 2 hours, and she used 50 minutes of them. She went to the small quarters she'd been given when she first arrived as a young woman of 22, before Kael had moved her to the Luna rooms in the main hall, before the formal bond, before the years that followed. The Luna quarters would already be locked. That she understood, the protocol was automatic. But the original room, the one off the east corridor that smelled like old plaster, and the cedar chest she'd brought from her mother's house, that one was still hers for another hour and 10 minutes. She packed what she could carry without assistance. 1 pack. She wasn't taking clothes she couldn't run in. She took the cedar box, which had her mother's bone-handled knife inside and a letter she'd read so many times the fold lines had gone fragile, and she wrapped it in a shirt and put it at the bottom. She took her own medical supplies, which she'd maintained herself because she'd learned 5 years ago that self-sufficiency wasn't a choice, it was a daily practice, or it was a lie. She took her secondary knife, the maps she kept in the desk's left drawer, the compass that had been her own before she arrived here and would be her own when she left. She did not take the silver Luna circlet from the nightstand because she hadn't been wearing it when he severed the bond, and she hadn't gone back to the main hall to retrieve it, and she wasn't going to. Mira arrived at 40 minutes. Mira was 17 and had been assigned to Seraphine as a housekeeping assistant 14 months ago, and had become, with the inevitability of proximity and honesty, the closest thing to a friend Seraphine maintained within these walls. Mira appeared in the doorway with her fists balled at her sides and her jaw doing the thing it did when she was trying to control something large, and her eyes were red but dry. "You can't," Mira said. "I already am." "Where will you go?" "Out." Seraphine tucked the compass into the pack's side pocket. "Away from here. That's a complete answer right now." "That's not an answer. That's a direction." "Mira!" "He's wrong." Mira's voice cracked on the second word and she pulled it back hard. "He is wrong about you. Everyone knows it. Half the Beta Council thinks it. Even Roan." "I know," Seraphine said. "Then why aren't you—" "Because I'm not going to prove myself to a man who just decided I was disposable in front of 200 people. She said it without heat, without anything sharp in it, the way you state a boundary that isn't negotiable. That's not stubbornness, Mira. That's arithmetic. There's no version of me fighting for a place in this pack where I come out as anything other than a woman who begged to stay. And I am not that woman. I do not become that woman. Not for him. Not for anyone." Mira was crying now silently, the tears just running without her making any sound around them. Seraphine crossed to her, put both hands on her shoulders, looked at her straight. "Listen to me. You are smarter than most of the senior warriors in this compound, and you know it. When the time comes, and it will come, use that. Don't perform smallness to make other people comfortable, you hear me? Mira pressed her lips together and nodded. Good. Seraphine let go. Shouldered the pack. It sat on her back with a solidity that felt almost good, the clean weight of what you could actually carry. Keep the cedar chest for me. If I can ever send for it, I will. She walked out before Mira could answer. The gate guard on the east exit was a man named Halleck, mid-40s, who had once let Seraphine handle a gash on his forearm after a training accident because she'd been the only one nearby with proper supplies in the right hands. He had the gate open when she arrived because orders had come down, and he stood with his face arranged into the careful blankness of a man who has learned when not to have an expression. Clear night, he said, because he had to say something. Yes, she said. She walked through the gate. She walked down the packed earth path to the outer tree line, and the forest received her the way forests receive everyone, without preference, without ceremony, with the simple physics of undergrowth and shadow, and the smell of pine resin and cold soil that was exactly the same for Luna or exile. She walked for 3 hours before she stopped. She stopped because her legs had found a rhythm, and she didn't want to interrupt it, not because she needed rest. She sat at the base of a broad pine with her back against the trunk and her pack between her knees, and she looked up through the canopy at the sky going black between the branches. She had made a promise to herself at the gate, not to Kael, not to the pack, to herself, in the private language of her own marrow, the way a promise works when it isn't performed for anyone else and carries no audience to witness it. You do not rebuild yourself into what he thought you should be. You build what you actually are, and you build it so well that the comparison becomes embarrassing. Not rage. She had examined what was moving through her chest as she walked and had categorized it carefully, the way she categorized everything, because unclear feelings made poor decisions, and she could not afford poor decisions. It was not rage. It was something colder and more permanent, the sensation of a door closing, and not from the outside. From her own hand. She understood something about herself in that hour under the pine tree that she had been approaching for years without quite reaching the edge of it. She was not someone who needed to be believed in by someone else in order to move. She had acted as though she were, because the structure around her had implied she should be, because the entire architecture of Aluna's role was built on the premise of partnership, of the bond, of the mutual recognition that made power flow between two wolves. She had accepted those premises the way you accept the rules of the territory you're born into. She did not live in that territory anymore. Whatever she built from here, she built from first principles. What did she actually know? What could she actually do? Where did her real capacities lie, stripped of title and bond and the borrowed authority of someone else's alpha rank? She sat with those questions until she could feel her own answers beginning to organize themselves, the way water finds its level. Not forced, not performed, just the natural settlement of things finding their shape. Then she slept for 4 hours, woke before dawn, and kept walking. The borderlands between Moonfang territory and the unclaimed Middle Country took 3 days on foot through terrain that did not care about her circumstances. The first day was cold and clear. The second brought rain that had no opinion about her dignity and soaked her methodically through the second afternoon. She ate from the pack, set a small snare on the second evening, and ate well enough from what it provided. Refilled her water from a stream, she tested carefully before trusting. On the third morning, she encountered the Moonfang Border Patrol. There were 3 of them, 2 young warriors she didn't know by name, and a beta called Tessun, who had been in the pack 8 years and who had, on one occasion, thanked her publicly for mediating a land dispute that had cost him 200 acres before she'd untangled the legal history. He recognized her immediately. The younger 2 looked between his face and hers, trying to calibrate. "Luna," Tessun said by reflex, and then corrected himself, and the correction passed across his face like a visible thing. "Seraphine." "Tessun." She kept walking, not confrontationally. She simply did not stop, because stopping would make this a negotiation, and she had no interest in negotiating her own exit. "You're in border territory," one of the younger wolves said. He was maybe 20, trying to sound authoritative, managing about 70% of it. "I know where I am." "We have instructions?" "To escort me out," she said, still walking. I know, I'm already going. You can walk beside me if it makes you feel better about completing your orders. Tesson fell into step beside her. The younger two exchanged a look and followed. They walked in silence for 40 minutes, to the stone markers that defined the edge of Moonfang's claimed ground, and Seraphine crossed the line without slowing down. Safe travels, Tesson said from behind the marker. His voice had something in it that wasn't in the protocol. She didn't turn around. You too, she said, and walked on, and did not look back at the territory she had spent 5 years trying to deserve. The unclaimed Middle Country had a reputation that was mostly accurate. Hard ground, harder winters, creatures that had not learned to fear wolfkind because the wolves that came through were rarely organized enough to teach them anything. She moved through it for 11 days, staying off the main trader paths, covering ground steadily. On the 5th day, she found a family of 4, a mother, father, and 2 children under 10, sheltering in the collapsed remains of a way station that had been abandoned long enough to grow moss on its south wall. The father had a fever that was 2 days past manageable. The mother had clearly slept approximately none of those 2 days, and her eyes had the particular brightness of a person running entirely on desperation. Seraphine had medical supplies. She used them. She stayed 3 days until the fever broke and the man could hold water and sit up without assistance. The mother, her name was Darius. She had a scar on her jaw from something she didn't explain, and a directness that Seraphine found immediately legible. Spent the first day watching Seraphine with the careful evaluation of someone who has learned not to assume kindness has no price. What do you want for this? Darius asked on the second evening. Nothing. Everyone wants something. I want to practice staying competent, Seraphine said. Your husband is good practice. He's stubborn about resting. Darius almost smiled. He is. Where are you headed? Silvercrest territory, if we make it. My sister married a merchant there. We were supposed to arrive before first snow. A pause. We left things late. Silvercrest. Seraphine considered the map in her head. The routes, the distances, the political geography she had studied for years in a role she no longer held. That's 7 days from here if the weather holds, 5 if you push, and your husband doesn't relapse. Do you know it, Silvercrest? I know the public history. I've read their governance structure and their territorial treaty records. Darius looked at her steadily for a moment. You're not just a traveler. I was a Luna, Seraphine said. It was the first time she had used the past tense for it, and the past tense sat correctly in her mouth, settled, neither raw nor painless, just accurate. I'm not anymore. What are you now? Seraphine was quiet for a moment. Undecided, she said, but moving. On the morning of the 4th day, when Darius's husband, Ben, he was called, a broad-shouldered man who apologized 3 times for being a burden while Seraphine was still actively treating him, was steady enough to walk, Seraphine stood at the way station door with her pack. Travel with us, Darius said. Not a request exactly. Not quite a command. The offer a practical person makes when the mathematics are clear. Seraphine looked at the road, looked at the family, looked at Darius's oldest child, a girl of about 8 who had been watching Seraphine's hands while she worked with the focused attention of someone learning a skill. Part of the way, she said. Igiids. She parted from them 2 days outside Silvercrest's eastern border. Darius had pushed ahead, needing to reach her sister before the girl's boots gave out entirely, and Seraphine had her own pace and her own reasons for entering the territory the way she intended to enter it, which was to say, alone and without a story attached to her by someone else's mouth. Silvercrest's border was marked differently than Moonfang's. Stone pillars, yes, but carved with a layered symbol that she recognized from the treaty records, the doubled crescent that indicated a multi-clan compact rather than single alpha rule. The compound governance structure. She had written a memo about it once, years ago, for Kael's council review, analyzing the advantages and vulnerabilities of shared leadership versus traditional alpha hierarchy. Kael had read it and thanked her and filed it somewhere. She stopped at the pillar and set her hand against the carved stone. Silvercrest was not her destination because it was safe. It was her destination because it was structured differently, because its governance had gaps and pressures and a specific kind of internal tension she had been studying from a distance for 3 years, and because she had skills that were suited exactly to the kind of fractures those structures produced. She was not here to be welcomed. She was here because she had been building towards something without knowing what to call it, and standing at this border, she could finally feel the shape of the thing. She was going to be useful, strategically, concretely, specifically useful, not as an accessory to someone else's power, but as a force that operated by its own logic. That was the promise she had made to herself under the pine tree. This was where she started keeping it. She crossed the border. The checkpoint wolves were professional and cautious. She presented herself without title and with her real name, which she had no reason to disguise, and she stated her intention: work, temporary settlement, potential long-term, with the directness she had always preferred because ambiguity cost more than it was worth. Seraphine Ashmore, the senior checkpoint wolf repeated, looking at her over the entry log. He was older, maybe 55, and had the specific quality of a man who had processed a very large number of people through very many circumstances and developed accordingly good instincts. Former Luna of Moonfang. Former, she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. Long walk from Moonfang territory. Yes. What kind of work? Administrative, governance, mediation, whatever the need is. She held his gaze steadily. I'm good at understanding systems under pressure. Right now I don't have a title, which means I'm flexible. Another long moment. Silvercrest has been in a complicated position, he said, carefully, in the tone of a man deciding in real time how much to say. There may be uses for someone with a specific set of skills. I can't promise anything. I'm not asking for promises, Seraphine said. I'm asking for entry. He stamped the log. Welcome to Silvercrest, he said, and stepped aside. She walked in. Walt, the city that served as Silvercrest's administrative center, was called Ardenmere, and it was nothing like Moonfang's fortress compound. Where Moonfang was vertical, everything built upward, walls and towers, the spatial language of defense, Ardenmere was horizontal, spreading outward from a central form in rings of increasing specificity, the way a governing body grows when it is genuinely trying to serve multiple factions rather than project authority downward. She found lodging in an inn near the third ring, a practical place with clean rooms and a proprietor who didn't ask questions because she'd been in the business long enough to know questions produced mostly lies, and the rent cleared fine without them. She paid for 2 weeks, which was nearly everything she had, and went upstairs and sat at the small desk in the corner of the room and spread her maps and thought. What did she know about Silvercrest's current problems? Publicly, 3 clan factions with competing interests in the northern trade routes, an elderly Lord Compact in declining health with no clear succession plan, 2 neighboring alpha packs circling the eastern border with increasing frequency, a junior council that was elected but functionally stalled because no one had built the coalition architecture to move anything forward. What did those things have in common? A structural vacuum at the center, not a power vacuum. Silvercrest had no shortage of powerful individuals. A coordination vacuum. Someone who could sit in a room with 3 hostile clan leaders and make them each feel they were winning something while actually moving the thing that needed to move. She had done exactly that for 5 years, in a context where no one had wanted her there from the beginning, and she had been starting from 0 credibility. She had learned the skill in harder conditions than this. She picked up a pen and started writing. The meeting with Silvercrest's second-tier council coordinator happened 8 days after her arrival, after 2 weeks of work she had done for free, organizing the chaos of the Eastern Border mediation records, which had been assigned to a junior coordinator who was smart but drowning, restructuring them into a usable form that made the conflicting claims visually legible for the first time in anyone's recent memory. The coordinator was a woman named Voss Amarin, somewhere in her 40s, who operated entirely without ceremony and had, according to the people Seraphine had carefully observed over her first 2 weeks, the respect of everyone who had worked with her for more than 30 days. I looked at what you did with the Eastern files, Voss said without preamble, when Seraphine sat down across from her. In 2 weeks, without being asked and without compensation. I was establishing credibility, Seraphine said. Voss looked at her with an expression that indicated this directness was being assessed and had so far passed. What do you actually want? A room, a small budget, access to 3 specific sets of records, the Northern Trade Dispute documentation, the clan succession precedents from the last 40 years, and the correspondence files from the last coalition talks before they broke down. A pause. And introductions. To the people the Lord Compact still trusts. Why introductions? Because trust is not transferable by credential, Seraphine said. It's built in person, and I need about 6 months of building it before anything I recommend will carry any weight. She met Voss's eyes. I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I'm here because your compact has problems I know how to solve. I'd like to solve them. I'd like to build something here worth building. Those 2 things are actually the same thing, but I understand if you need to hear it in multiple framings before it lands. A long silence. Former Luna of Moonfang, Voss said finally. Former. That's a notable fall. Or a notable beginning, Seraphine said. Depending on where you're standing. Voss studied her for another moment, picked up a pen, made a note on the paper in front of her. Come back tomorrow morning, Voss said. I'll have the records ready. She went back. She went back every morning for 4 months. She sat in rooms where she had no authority and built the arguments anyway, patient and precise, putting words in the right order with the particular economy of someone who has learned to make every sentence carry its weight. She sat with Clan Elder Dawnwood in the 2nd month and listened to him talk for 3 hours about the grain rights dispute without interrupting once, and when he was finished, she spent 40 minutes drawing out the specific clause in the 40-year-old compact that would resolve it in his favor, in a way that also resolved it in the other clan's favor if they agreed to a different precedent on water access. He looked at the document she had prepared. You found this, he said. It was there, she said. Someone needed to look. In the 4th month, the Lord Compact summoned her. His name was Aldrich Vane. He was 73 and had governed Silvercrest's compact through 3 wars, 2 succession crises, and a decade of the kind of steady grinding political work that didn't make stories but kept territories alive. He had the bone structure of someone who had been striking in his youth, and the presence of someone who had spent 50 years becoming more interesting than striking. He sat across from her at a table that was bare except for 2 cups of water and a small stack of the documents she had authored in the past 4 months. I've been reading your work, he said. I know, she said. I assumed you were. You assumed. You have people. Everyone in Ardenmere worth knowing has people. I've been visible by design. She kept her hands flat on the table, open, neutral, not hiding anything. I needed you to see the work before we met. Otherwise, the meeting would have been about my background rather than my capability. Aldrich Vane was quiet for a moment. Cale Draven lost you, he said. She held his gaze. He made a choice. A spectacularly poor one, based on what I'm looking at. Based on what you're looking at, she agreed without effect. He picked up the top document. The Northern Trade Restructuring Proposal. 15 pages. She had spent 3 nights on the final draft. If I gave you a larger mandate, he said slowly, what would you do with it? She did not hesitate. She had been preparing the answer for 4 months, not because she had expected this exact question, but because she had known that if she kept doing the work, the question would eventually come in some form, and a person who had to think about the answer when the moment arrived had not been paying close enough attention to their own intentions. I would fix the succession framework before it becomes a crisis, she said. I would resolve the Northern trade dispute in a way that actually holds, instead of postponing it for the next generation to inherit. I would build a compact council structure with real decision-making authority, so that when you are no longer here, the territory doesn't fracture along the fault lines that are currently being held together by the specific fact of you. She paused. And I would do it without taking a title or a seat on any formal council, because I'm not here to accumulate authority. I'm here to build infrastructure. Those are different things. Aldrich Vane set the document down. My senior counsel thinks you're dangerous, he said. I know. They're not wrong. No, she said. They're right for the wrong reason. I'm not dangerous to Silvercrest. I'm dangerous to the specific comfortable arrangements that are costing Silvercrest the future it could have. Another silence. Longer this time. Come to the council session Thursday, he said. You won't have a formal seat, but you'll be there. That's enough, she said. For now. She left the room, walked down the corridor, and out into the Ardenmere Square, where the morning was cold and clear and smelled like pine smoke and the particular mineral quality of mountain stone, and she stood still for exactly 30 seconds with her face turned slightly upward toward the sky, feeling the quality of what had just happened, cataloging it. Not triumph. Something quieter and more structural. The sense of a foundation being poured. The work had only just begun. This meeting had been, in the technical sense, nothing but an opening. She had been given permission to sit in a room, nothing more. What she was proposing would take years. It would be resisted, repeatedly, by people whose interests ran contrary to it. There would be setbacks, there would be moments she would question whether the specific path she had chosen was sustainable. She had considered all of that. She had decided it was worth it. She started walking toward the records office. What? 3 weeks after the council session, she found the letter. It arrived through Voss Ameron's office, routed through official channels, which meant it had been held at the Silvercrest border for verification before being delivered, which meant the person who sent it had known the routing protocols and used them deliberately. The seal was Moonfang's, the layered crescent of bared teeth that she had seen on every official document for 5 years. Not Kale's personal seal, the Pack Council seal. She opened it in her small office on the second floor of the administrative building, which had become, in the past 3 months, a room that looked the way rooms look when someone is actually living in the work. Papers in ordered stacks, the walls covered in her own notations written in her small, precise hand, the smell of the candles she burned when she worked past dark. The letter was from Elder Corvus, the man whose test she had allegedly failed, the man whose extended silence in the coalition negotiation she had chosen not to fill because she had read it as a tactical pause, because she had been waiting for the shape of what he was actually asking for. And Kael had read her waiting as hesitation and drawn a different conclusion and acted on it without asking her. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph said that the Moonfang Pack's coalition negotiations had collapsed entirely, that 2 of the 3 northern alliances had withdrawn, and that a third was threatening to formalize an opposition compact. The second paragraph said that Alpha Kale Draven's authority was being formally questioned by a minority faction of the Beta Council, and that the question had spread faster than it should have, which suggested it had been seeded deliberately. The third paragraph said, the Alpha made an error. The error has become, as errors often do, a larger problem than the original concern it was meant to solve. I am informing you of this not as a request, and not as an apology, and not as an overture. I am informing you because you deserve to know the state of the house you left, and because I believe you are exactly the kind of person who will have decided by the end of this paragraph precisely what it means for your own future. She set the letter down. She looked at the wall above her desk where she had pinned the Northern Trade District map with 3-colored thread marking the competing claims, a problem she was halfway through solving. Corvus was right. She had already decided what it meant. It did not mean return. It did not mean vindication. It did not mean watching from a safe distance while Kael's pack burned and feeling something comfortable about it, because that would have been a kind of smallness she had already decided she would not become. It meant something was coming, something that would make the political geography of every pack in this territory unstable, something that would require exactly the kind of work she had been building herself to do. The coordination, the structure building, the capacity to sit in rooms full of hostile interests and find the thread that held. It meant she needed to move faster. She reached for the pen and pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the left-hand stack and began to write. The council session 6 months later was supposed to be a procedural review. It was not a procedural review. It began at the 7th hour of the morning in the main council hall, which held 37 people, 12 senior council members, their aides, Lord Compact Aldrich Vane at the head of the long table, and in the position that was technically an observer's chair, but had slowly, over months, drifted into something else, Seraphine Ashmore. It began as a procedural review because the Northern trade dispute had reached a formal stalemate, Because two of the three clan elders had refused to sign the resolution framework she had developed, because the resolution framework was, in fact, correct, and the clan elders knew it, and knowing a thing is correct and agreeing to it in front of witnesses are two different processes requiring two different levers. Seraphine had identified the second lever 6 weeks ago. She had waited to use it because timing was not neutral. When Elder Dawnwood said, for the fourth time in an hour, that the language of Clause 7 was unacceptable, Seraphine requested the floor. She was not technically entitled to the floor. She had no council seat. Aldrich Vane nodded to her anyway, and the slight tightening of Elder Breswick's jaw across the table, Breswick, who had been the most resistant member of the council to her presence, was something she filed and moved past. She stood. She said, clearly and without preamble, Clause 7 references the Water Rights Compact from 62 years ago. I've been through those records and I found a secondary agreement that was signed 1 month later, separate document, separate parties, that supersedes the water rights terms in the exact section Elder Dawnwood has been disputing. The secondary agreement is legally current. It was never formally referenced in the trade compact because the drafter didn't know it existed. She looked at Dawnwood. If Clan Dawnwood accepts the secondary agreement as the operative document, Clause 7 resolves in your favor on the water access. The northern trade route allocation in Section 4 remains intact for Clan Breswick. Both of you get what you've actually been trying to get for 3 years. Silence. Breswick said carefully, Why wasn't this found before? Because no one went looking in the secondary archive, Seraphine said. The secondary archive has not been catalogued in 20 years. I spent 2 weeks in it. A pause. It's very organized now. Another silence. Then Dawnwood made a sound that was approximately a laugh, or the acknowledgement of something that had suddenly become obvious. Show me the document, he said. She had 3 copies already on the table. The session ended at midday. The framework was signed. Both clans shook hands with a grudgingness that was, in its way, the most honest form of political progress. People who have been given what they wanted and are slightly annoyed they can't still be aggrieved. Voss Amarin found her in the corridor afterward. Breswick is furious with you, Voss said. Breswick is furious that the problem got solved without enough advance warning for him to position himself as the person who solved it, Seraphine said. That's manageable. He's going to push back on any further role for you. I know, he should. That's his job. She was already walking toward the records room. Give him a problem I can't see yet and let him solve it first. Let him feel like he's ahead of me for a month. The resentment will cool. Voss walked beside her. A pause. Aldrich wants to formalize your position, Voss said. Seraphine stopped. She turned. What kind of formalization? She said carefully. Council advisor, not a seat, an official designated position with a mandate and a budget, and not yet, Seraphine said. Seraphine, not yet. She said it without edge, without apology. 3 more months. I need 3 more months of visible results before a formal title. If the title comes too early, it becomes the story and the story becomes a problem. Let the work speak until it doesn't need me to translate it. Voss studied her for a moment. You planned this, Voss said. Not accusatory. Something closer to certainty confirming itself. I planned to build something that would last, Seraphine said. The steps are what they are. Tiet. The letter from Aldrich Vane arrived on the first morning of the following spring, and it was not addressed to an observer or a volunteer or a former Luna operating on grace and borrowed access. It was addressed to Seraphine Ashmore, Chief Administrative Counsel, Silvercrest Compact. She had not asked for the title. She had known it was coming. Those are different things. She had spent 8 months building infrastructure, and the infrastructure was real. Not her image of it, not her hope for it, but the actual functioning systems, the documented resolution of disputes that had been bleeding the compact for years, the succession framework that now had 3 provisional signatures and would have a 4th by summer, the renewed border agreements with 2 of Silvercrest's most volatile neighbors, achieved through 3 rounds of exhausting negotiation that had required her to sit in rooms with alphas who thought she was an interesting curiosity at best and a threat to Pax sovereignty at worst, and convince them otherwise by being, consistently, the most useful person in every room she entered. She read the letter twice. She set it on the desk. Then she went back to work. The morning the first emissary from Moonfang arrived at Silvercrest's administrative gates, asking to speak with someone about the political collapse of the Northern Compact, the gate record listed the arrival at the 7th hour. It was a junior envoy, a wolf she didn't know, carrying a sealed letter, authorized to speak preliminarily, but not to negotiate. Seraphine was in the middle of a resource allocation review with Voss when the message was brought to her. She read it without breaking the rhythm of the meeting, finished the allocation review, and then sat for exactly 1 minute after Voss left, with the Moonfang seal facing upward on the desk. She knew what the letter was before she opened it. She knew because she had been watching the Northern Compact situation develop for 14 months. She knew because the collapse pattern she had identified in Corvus's original letter had proceeded exactly as it had looked like it would proceed, slowly, then suddenly, the way political failures always move. She knew because she had been planning for this conversation since the day she walked out of Moonfang's gate. She opened the letter. It was from Kael. Not formal, not through the council, not through Roan, who would have been the appropriate channel for an official outreach. From Kael's own hand on plain paper, without the alpha seal. Seraphine, the Northern situation is past what we can resolve alone. I know what you've built in Silvercrest. I'm not asking for what I lost the right to ask for. I'm asking for what you've become. I'll come to Ardenmere if you'll allow it, not to negotiate terms. For that I'll send Roan. I'm asking to come myself because I owe you something that I can only deliver in person, and I've already waited too long. Kael, she set the letter down. She looked at the window. The Ardenmere Square was full of mourning, full of ordinary purpose. Merchants with carts, 2 warriors heading toward the training ground, a child chasing something through the gap between 2 buildings. She had not been waiting for this letter. She had been aware it would come, and she had been moving in directions that had nothing to do with it, building things that required nothing from Moonfang or from Kael or from any version of a past that she had closed the door on from her own side. But she understood something about the letter that went beyond the personal. The Northern Compact collapse was not a Moonfang problem. It was a regional problem, the kind that spread through borders the way water moves through cracked foundations. Not all at once, but inevitably, unless someone built something structurally sound enough to hold. She was the person who built things that held. She reached for paper. She began to compose her reply. She had written 3 words. The meeting can. When the door opened. It was Voss. Her face had the specific quality it had when something had happened that had not been scheduled. Seraphine, she said. What? There are 3 alphas in the East receiving room. A pause. They came together, on foot, without formal announcement. Another pause, and in this one Seraphine heard something she had not heard in Voss's voice in 8 months of working beside her. Caution. Seraphine, 2 of them are from the Northern Compact. The third... Voss stopped. The third, Seraphine said. The third is from the Iron Veil Coalition, Voss said. The one that's been moving troops. Seraphine set down the pen. In the East receiving room, 3 alphas, who had no business being in the same building, were waiting for her. And through the wall and across the square, and through the weight of 8 months of work and 3 years of political observation, she could already feel the shape of what had brought them here, and what it meant, and exactly how little time anyone had left before it became something no amount of administrative infrastructure could contain. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the door. And then her assistant, a young man named Fen, 18, the son of the same family she had treated in the Middle Country Way Station, appeared in the corridor with a second message, this one hand-delivered through 3 different intermediaries. And when she read the 4 lines on the paper, her hands went very still. The Iron Veil Coalition was not sending representatives to negotiate. The Iron Veil Coalition had already crossed the border. The message was 4 lines. Seraphine read it twice, not because the words were unclear, but because clarity sometimes needs a second pass when it arrives carrying the weight of everything you've been preparing for and hoping wouldn't come this fast. Iron Veil forces crossed the Braken River at dawn. 3 columns. Estimated 400 wolves per column. They are not moving like a patrol. Border Outpost 12 is not responding. She folded the paper once, cleaned down the middle, and handed it back to Fen. Find Voss, she said. Tell her to clear the east receiving room of everyone except the 3 alphas. No aides, no scribes, no one who doesn't have a command rank. Lock the outer corridor. Fen moved. She stood in the hallway for exactly 2 seconds, feeling the specific sensation of a situation crystallizing around her. Not panic, never panic, but the heightened compression of a mind that has shifted into a different gear, where everything irrelevant drops away and what remains is pure operational geometry. 1,200 wolves already across a border, moving in columns, not dispersed. That was not a raid. That was a statement of intent with a military vocabulary. She walked to the east receiving room, but the 3 alphas were standing when she entered, not sitting, which told her the energy in the room had not settled since they arrived. 2 of them she recognized from file photographs and 1 previous correspondence. Alpha Gareth Solon of Northmere, a compact member pack, heavy set, around 50, with the kind of face that had stopped pretending to be diplomatic sometime in its early 40s. Beside him, Alpha Cress of the Winding Vale, younger, late 30s, lean in the way of someone who had grown up in scarcity and built muscle as a deliberate choice rather than a genetic inheritance. The third she had not expected in this room. Alpha Dunmore Vale of the Iron Vale. Western Reaches, not the Iron Vale Coalition's military command, but the Western Territorial faction, which had been publicly neutral for 2 years while the Coalition's Eastern leadership built its army. He was 60, silver-haired, and had the posture of a man who was accustomed to rooms deciding in his favor before he opened his mouth. He was not deciding anything right now. He was watching her the way you watch a fire you're not sure you can control. "Close the door," Seraphine said. Fen did, from outside, and then they were 4, and the room had a different quality. "You know what's happening," Gareth said. Not a question. "Border Outpost 12 went dark this morning," she said. 1,200 Iron Vale troops across the break-in. Yes. She looked at each of them in turn, quick and direct. "What I don't know is why the 3 of you walked into Silvercrest's administrative hall together without announcement, which means one of you has information you decided to bring here before you brought it to your own councils. I'd like to know which one and why." Cress looked at Vale. Vale looked at Seraphine. "The Eastern Coalition gave the order 4 days ago," Vale said. "I received word through my own people, not official channels, not from the command structure. From a contact I've maintained inside the Eastern leadership for 11 years. He paused. "The crossing at Breakin is the opening move. There are 2 more planned within the next 6 days, Southern Reach and the Keldor Passage. If they hold Keldor," Gareth said and stopped. "They control the only viable route between the Northern Compact and the Southern Alliance territories," Seraphine finished. "Every pack between those 2 geographic points becomes isolated. No reinforcement possible, no coordinated response." She kept her voice even. This was not new information. She had drawn this exact scenario on paper 8 months ago and filed it in the Northern Threat Assessment that had been read by 4 people in Silvercrest and 3 in other territories. She had been hoping she was wrong. What is the Coalition's stated justification? Border violation precedent from 14 years ago, Vale said. A grievance that's been technically dormant. They weaponized an archive. They did. She almost said, "I know what that looks like," and did not say it. Filed it. Moved. Dunmore. She used his name without title, deliberately, and watched him register the choice and decide not to object. "Your Western Iron Vale, neutral faction. Why are you here and not coordinating with your own territorial defense?" Vale held her gaze. He had very pale eyes, the color of winter water, and they were doing something complicated. "Because the Eastern Coalition's command has already sent word to the Western territories," he said. "We are expected to hold our borders closed during the campaign. Not assist, not interfere. Wait for a consolidated Iron Vale to emerge from the other side." A beat. "My pack has 300 wolves. The Eastern Command has 1,200 already in the field and more behind them." "You came here because you can't fight them alone," Cress said, not unkindly. "I came here," Vale said, looking at Seraphine, Because I have been watching what has been built in Silvercrest for the past year, and I believe the person who built it is the only one with any chance of holding this together before it becomes something none of us survive intact. The room was quiet. Seraphine looked at the table. Then she looked at all three of them. "I need a map," she said, "and I need all of you to sit down and tell me everything you actually know, not everything you're willing to admit to in front of witnesses. There's a difference, and I don't have time for the diplomatic version." Gareth pulled out a chair. Cress followed. Vale held her gaze for one more second, something in it that was neither apology nor deference, but was closer to the specific respect of a man conceding that the room has shifted. And then he sat. She stayed standing. They talked for 3 hours. Not the polished, managed kind of talking that happened in formal council sessions, where every word was pre-auditioned for political survivability. The unguarded kind, the kind that happens when the situation has finally outrun the pretense of control and what's left is the raw material of the actual problem. Gareth's Northmere pack was 12 hours from the Keldor Passage by fast travel. He had 240 combat-ready wolves and a beta council that would follow him into a fight, but had never coordinated with an outside force and hadn't been asked to in 15 years. He also had, though he spent 20 minutes not saying it directly before Seraphine asked him flatly, a debt relationship with one of the Southern Alliance pack leaders that he had been hoping to keep out of any formal alliance structure because of its complicated history. "How complicated?" she said. "Complicated like he saved my pack during the famine year, and I still owe him more than I've paid back, and I don't want that debt called in a context where I have no leverage." "Or," Seraphine said, "you call him before the crisis forces the call. You bring him in as a partner instead of waiting to be brought in as a debtor. The debt becomes an alliance, and the alliance becomes a position." She held Gareth's eyes. "He wants to know you haven't forgotten what he did for you. Show him you haven't." Gareth was quiet for a moment. Then, "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple. It will be a difficult conversation, and he will push you on terms. But you walk in with your hands open instead of your back against a wall. That changes the geometry." Cress had a different problem. The Winding Vale's border shared 2 miles with Iron Vale Eastern Territory, which meant the moment the Coalition's military movement became public, Cress's pack was positioned in a way that looked like either a target or a collaborator depending on who was drawing the map. He had spent the past 4 days trying to manage both optics simultaneously and had achieved, by his own admission, primarily a deepening anxiety. "You can't manage both," Seraphine said. "Pick the one that serves your people and make it visible. If you're not Iron Vale's ally, say so publicly, in writing, with Silvercrest as a witness. The statement exists on record. Anyone who claims otherwise has to argue against documentation. And if the Coalition decides that statement is a declaration of opposition, then you're in the same position as every other pack in their path, but you're there with your integrity intact and your allies able to see exactly where you stand." She paused. "Ambiguity isn't safety, Cress. It's just a different kind of exposure." Cress looked at the table for a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. The nod of someone who has just acknowledged a thing they already knew and had been avoiding. Vale was the most complicated, not because his situation was the most dangerous, but because he was 60 years old and had spent 4 decades operating inside an Iron Vale political structure that he was now proposing to break from, and that history was sitting in the room with him the way a third person does, visible only to him, taking up space. "If you formally align with Silvercrest," she said, "the Eastern Coalition treats your Western territories as occupied by opposition force. You understand that?" "Yes." "You're 300 wolves against 1,200, plus whatever the Eastern territories can put in the field behind the initial column. I understand the numbers." "I'm not questioning your courage," she said. "I'm asking whether you've made peace with the fact that this choice costs more than you can predict, and you're making it anyway." Vale looked at her. "My granddaughter is 7, he said. "She lives in the Western Territories. I'm not making this choice for the politics." A pause. "I'm making it because the world I leave her shouldn't be one I kept clean hands in at the cost of letting something like this run." She held his gaze for a moment. Not soft. She didn't do soft in these rooms, couldn't afford to. But she let the words land and stay landed, and something in her posture acknowledged them without sentimentalizing them. "All right," she said. "Then here's what needs to happen in the next 48 hours. Check." She didn't sleep. Voss found her at the 3rd hour of the morning in the records room, surrounded by treaty documents and tactical maps, and the working draft of an emergency compact resolution that she had been building out of pieces she had been quietly assembling for months. The way you pre-cut lumber in advance of a storm because you know the roof is coming off eventually and you don't want to be sourcing materials in the rain. "You need to sleep," Voss said. "I need to have this resolution ready for Aldrich by dawn," Seraphine said, without looking up. "After dawn, I'll sleep." Voss set a cup of something hot on the corner of the desk that wasn't covered in paper and stood for a moment looking at the maps. "The coalition crossed Bracken," Voss said. "Yes." "This is going to be bad." "It's going to be survivable," Seraphine said. "Those are different things. Bad we can work with. Survivable requires us to move in the right order at the right speed." She finally looked up. "I need you to send a message to Rohnveld at Moonfang, not Kael. Rohn. Through the standard route, nothing that looks like a back channel. I need to know what Moonfang's actual military posture is, and I need to know it from someone who will tell me the truth." Voss was quiet. "You've been in contact with Moonfang already," she said. "Corvus wrote me 8 months ago," Seraphine said. "I read the correspondence. I've been watching the situation. I have not been in communication." A pause. "I'm in communication now because the situation requires it, not because of anything personal. Write those words in the message header. Rohn will understand what they mean." Voss took a small note. "And Kael's letter?" "Hasn't been answered yet. He asked to come in person." "I know what he asked." She picked up the pen again. "One thing at a time. The resolution first. Personal correspondence after the coalition doesn't move through Keldor." The Silvercrest Council met at dawn. Aldrich Vane read the resolution framework she had prepared with the deliberate pace of a man who reads carefully because he understands that speed in reading produces slowness in implementation, and he had learned that cost personally at least twice. He read every clause. He asked 4 questions. She answered all of them without hedging. "You want to activate the Compact's Emergency Alliance provision," he said. "Yes." "That provision has never been used. It exists because someone decided it should. I'd rather use it before we need it than discover its enforceability during a siege." The council debated for 2 hours. Breswick pushed back. Of course Breswick pushed back. Breswick was structurally required to push back. It was how he maintained his position as the council's internal check, which was a legitimate function, and she had accounted for it. She let him make his 3 objections in full without interrupting them, because they were real objections and the council needed to hear them and hear them answered, not talked over. When he was finished, Beta Breswick's concern about precedent is valid. This provision, once activated, changes the Compact's relationship to external military coordination permanently. That's a real cost. She looked at the table. The question isn't whether to avoid that cost. The question is whether the cost of not activating it, right now, in these specific conditions, is larger. She paused. "It is. By a factor I can demonstrate if anyone wants the detailed analysis." Nobody asked for the detailed analysis. The vote was 11-1. The provision was activated. She signed the implementing resolution as Chief Administrative Counsel and watched Aldrich Vane press his seal into the wax. And the thing that moved through her in that moment was not triumph or relief, but something more like recognition. The feeling of something she had been building finally bearing the weight it was designed to carry. It held. The infrastructure held. She had 15 minutes before the first coordination meeting with the newly activated Compact Council, and she used 12 of them, writing a reply to Kael's letter. Not a long letter. She was not in the business of long letters right now. "Kael, the situation has moved past the personal and into the structural, which means the conversation I'm willing to have is about the coalition threat and Moonfang's position in the response, nothing else. Rohn will receive a formal outreach from Silvercrest through official channels within the day. That is the conversation. If you want to come to Ardenmere, understand what you're walking into. I am not the woman who left Moonfang's gate. I do not need you to acknowledge that, but I need you to know it before you cross my border. Because the version of this meeting you may be imagining and the version that will actually happen are different enough that the gap could cause problems for both of us. You are welcome if your purpose is the alliance. For anything else, wait. Seraphine. She sealed it, handed it to Fen for dispatch, picked up the meeting brief. Washington. The coordination session ran 4 hours and produced the first concrete military framework Silvercrest's compact had assembled in living memory. Gareth Solon had sent word to his southern contact, the debt call she had advised, and received, faster than any of them had expected, a response that was not just acceptance but a counteroffer. 2 southern packs, not one, willing to formalize the alliance if Silvercrest signed as the coordinating authority. Silvercrest signed. Crest submitted his formal non-coalition declaration before midday, and Seraphine had it witnessed and registered before the ink was dry. Vale spent the session in the difficult position of a man formally breaking from a structure he had inhabited for 40 years, and he did it with the specific kind of steadiness that comes not from comfort, but from the decision having already been fully made in a previous room, so that this room only requires the execution. She watched him sign his name to the Silvercrest Compact Agreement and thought, briefly and without sentiment, that it was one of the more genuinely courageous things she had seen in her professional life. Then the runner arrived. She was mid-sentence, describing the proposed defensive line along the northern corridor, when Fen appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone who has been told to interrupt and is afraid to. "What?" she said. "Roan Velda, Beta of Moonfang," Fen said. "He's at the east gate. He came alone." A pause. "He says Alpha Draven is 2 hours behind him." The room absorbed this. Gareth looked at Seraphine with the particular expression of a man recalibrating. She kept her face arranged. "Tell the gate to receive Beta Velda," she said. "Standard courtesy. Put him in the second meeting room with water and whatever food we have. Tell him I'll be there in 30 minutes. She turned back to the map on the table. "We were discussing the northern corridor." The session continued. Her voice stayed level. Her hands stayed still. Inside, in the working mechanism behind her face, she was running the arithmetic of what Kyle arriving 2 hours behind his beta meant, what it said about the state of Moonfang, what it said about what Kyle had decided this meeting was, what it said about the conversation that was now, regardless of what she had written in the letter, going to happen. She had told him to understand what he was walking into. She understood now that she would have to do the same. Ronveldi had not aged in the way some people aged, which was dramatically. He had aged in the way soldiers aged, incrementally, each year adding a small additional layer of weight to features that had been built for weight from the beginning. He stood when she came into the second meeting room because he was the kind of man who stood, and he looked at her with the direct and slightly pained expression of someone who has been carrying a specific acknowledgement for a long time and is finally in the room where it can be set down. "Roan," she said. "Seraphine." He said her name the same way he always had. Not Luna, not former, just the name, given the same weight it had always carried in his voice, which was the weight of someone who had always known what it was worth. "You look like yourself." "I am myself," she said. "Sit down. Talk to me about Moonfang's military posture." He sat. He talked. She listened. The picture was not good. The Northern alliances had collapsed, as Corvus's letter had indicated, and the collapse had not been clean. It had pulled 2 of Moonfang's border agreements down with it, left the eastern flank exposed, triggered a Beta Council crisis that Kael had managed but not resolved. The pack was intact. The pack's position was not. They were not weak in the way of an army that had been defeated. They were weak in the way of a body under chronic stress, structurally sound but running on diminished reserves, the kind of condition that looks fine until the moment it doesn't. "He should have listened to you about Corvus," Roan said. It cost him something to say it. She could hear the cost, but he said it clean, no softening. "That's history," she said. "It's relevant history. It's history I don't have time for right now." She leaned forward. "Can Moonfang hold its eastern flank through a 30-day engagement if we formalize the alliance and commit Silvercrest coordination support? Roan looked at the table for a moment, the particular look of a man running numbers he has already run multiple times. If we get supply line support from the southern route and Moonfang doesn't have to maintain the eastern flank alone, he said, yes, 30 days, maybe 40. I can get you the supply line. I know you can. He looked at her. That's why he's coming. Roan, she kept her voice steady. What I need from you right now is a military assessment and a formal alignment commitment from Moonfang to the Silvercrest Compact. That's the conversation. The rest... He knows he was wrong, Roan said, not to derail her, just because it was apparently a thing that needed to be said by someone, in this room before the other thing happened. Not in the way a man knows something he can walk back from. The other way. She was quiet for a moment. That doesn't change the terms of the alliance, she said. No, Rowan agreed. It doesn't. She pushed the formal alignment document across the table. He read it in the careful way she had learned meant he would sign it. He signed it. She countersigned. She stood, and Rowan stood. And for a moment they looked at each other across the table with the accumulated weight of 5 years of history and one catastrophically bad decision and 8 months of consequence, and everything that had been built out of that consequence. And what passed between them was not forgiveness and not its opposite, but the specific acknowledgement of two people who have always respected each other and continue to. He'll be at the East Gate in 90 minutes, Rowan said. I know, she said. Are you ready for that? She picked up the signed document. I've been ready for a lot of things I didn't choose, she said. This is one more. She walked toward the door and then she stopped because her hand was on the door and through the door was the hallway. And the hallway led toward the East Gate, and at the East Gate in 90 minutes was a conversation she could not fully predict, a variable she could not fully control, the one element in the entire structure she was building that refused to be managed by documents and frameworks and the clean architecture of properly ordered systems. The door opened from the outside. Fen stood there with the look he had been wearing all day. The look of a young man whose job had become significantly more dramatic than expected. There's a problem, he said. There are multiple problems, she said. Which specific one? The Iron Veil Coalition sent a representative, he said. Not military, political. She arrived 20 minutes ago, separate from the troop movement, separate from Veil, separate from everything. She's in the outer hall and she's... He stopped. Fen. She says she comes with a message from the Coalition's Eastern Command, he said. She says the Coalition will halt the advance if Silvercrest agrees to one condition. Seraphine waited. The condition, Fen said, is you. The hallway was very quiet. The Coalition's Eastern Command, Fen said, is requesting that Silvercrest remove you from the Alliance coordination role, permanently. They say they will not negotiate with anyone else. They say, he swallowed, they say if you remain in the coordination position, the advance continues and what happens after that is Silvercrest's choice. Seraphine stood in the doorway of the room where Roan Veld was still sitting with the signed documents, in the building she had walked into 8 months ago with nothing, in the territory she had built into something that a military coalition had decided was dangerous enough to be worth specifically targeting before it could reach its full potential. The advance was already in motion. Kael was 90 minutes away. 3 alphas had signed the compact today because they trusted her. Aldrich Vane had put his seal on a resolution built on the credibility of her name. And someone across the border had looked at everything she'd built and decided the most effective first move was not a military one. It was this. She breathed in once. She breathed out. Tell the representative, she said, that I'll see her in 5 minutes. The coalition representative's name was Lyra Vane. Seraphine registered the surname first, Vane, same as Dunmore, and the recognition moved through her like cold water finding a crack. She kept her face arranged and sat down across the table from a woman who was approximately 35, black-haired, with the kind of composed stillness that is not natural but learned, practiced until it reads as natural. She was dressed for a diplomatic mission, not a military one. That was deliberate. Everything about her was deliberate. You're Western Iron Veil, Seraphine said. I was, Lyra said. I serve the Eastern Coalition's political office now, have for 2 years. Dunmore Vale's niece, a pause. His brother's daughter, yes. He doesn't know you're here. No, Lyra said. He doesn't. Seraphine absorbed that and moved past it. The family geography was a complication she would return to, but not now. You said the coalition will halt the advance under one condition. Say it again, clearly, so there's no room for later dispute about what was offered. Lyra set her hands flat on the table. The Eastern Coalition's advance halts if Silvercrest removes you from the Alliance coordination role and commits to a neutrality position for the duration of the territorial dispute. The compact remains intact. No pack loses territory. The Coalition's campaign against the Northern Packs continues without Silvercrest's interference. You're asking Silvercrest to watch its compact members get dismantled. I'm asking Silvercrest to survive, Lyra said. Those are different things. Seraphine looked at her for a moment. And your evidence that this offer is genuine. Lyra reached into the document case she carried and placed a sealed letter on the table. The Coalition's Eastern Command seal. Seraphine broke it and read the contents, which were exactly what Lyra had described, in formal language with 4 signatures. Real signatures, not scribal proxies. You understand, Seraphine said, that this offer means the Coalition sees this compact as a credible threat. You don't negotiate to remove an obstacle that isn't one. I understand that, Lyra said. So do I. She placed the letter back on the table. The answer is no. Something shifted in Lyra's posture, barely detectable. I'd encourage you to think carefully. I have thought carefully, Seraphine said. I've been thinking carefully about this situation for 14 months. The answer is no, for a reason that has nothing to do with my personal stake in the role. If Silvercrest accepts the terms of this offer, removes its coordinator and steps back, every compact member who signed this week watches their coordinating authority fold under the first real pressure it encountered. The compact is over before it functions. The Coalition gets Silvercrest's neutrality, destroys the Northern Packs, and approaches whatever remains from a position of regional dominance. No one in this territory is safe inside that outcome. She kept her voice even. You can take that answer back, or we can continue talking, but the condition isn't negotiable. Lyra looked at her for a long moment with something in her face that was harder to read than the words. There are people in this building, Lyra said carefully, who may disagree with your answer. There are always people who disagree, Seraphine said. She meant it as a statement of fact. She didn't know yet how precisely true it was. Kael arrived at the East Gate at the 53rd minute of the 2nd hour. She knew the moment he cleared the gate because Fen came to find her with the expression he'd been wearing all day. And beneath the expression was something else, a kind of focused attention that said the young man had opinions about this situation and was working very hard to keep them in the appropriate professional location. He came alone, Fen said, just himself. No guard, no aide. I know, she said. She had been in the corridor outside the main council room, reviewing the defensive corridor maps with Gareth's tactical lieutenant, a woman of about 40 named Sira, who had the particular quality of a warrior who has learned to trust paper as much as instinct. She finished the sentence she was in the middle of, confirmed the proposed northern line with Sira, and then walked toward the east receiving room. She did not rush. She had long ago stopped believing that rushing changed the nature of what was coming. It only changed how composed you were when it arrived. She heard him before she saw him. Not his voice. She heard his footfall in the corridor, the specific weight and rhythm of it, unchanged from 5 years of proximity that had embedded the sound somewhere below conscious recognition. The body knew things before the mind agreed to know them. She noted the knowing and kept walking. He was standing at the window when she entered, looking out at the Ardenmere Square, and he turned when the door opened. Whatever he had been preparing for on the walk from the gate, the preparation didn't fully hold. She watched something move across his face and settle imperfectly. Recognition, and something rawer beneath it that he pulled down before it became readable. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time, not broken. Kael didn't break, but the edges were different than she remembered. The particular hardness around his jaw that had always come from controlling too much had given way to something more eroded, more honest. She stopped 6 feet from him, far enough to be professional, close enough for the conversation. Seraphine, he said. Kael. She kept it level. Roan has already signed the formal alignment. Moonfang is in the compact. That conversation is done. He absorbed the directness without flinching. I know, that's not why I came. Then tell me why quickly, because we have an active military situation and 3 hours before the next coordination session. He looked at her for a moment. You built something remarkable. I know what I built, she said. That's not what you came to say either. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. Something more like the involuntary acknowledgement of a man who has been accurately read, again, and remembers what that felt like. No, he said, it isn't. He was quiet for a moment in the way of someone assembling words in the right order because the wrong order would make them untrue. I made a decision that I told myself was strategic and was actually fear. I was afraid that the thing you were becoming was too large for the structure I had, and instead of building a larger structure, I removed the thing. He held her eyes straight. That's what happened. I dressed it in language about strength and pack requirements, and I delivered it in front of 200 people so it couldn't be undone, and it was wrong. Not strategically wrong, though it was that too. Wrong. The room was very still. She had thought, on various occasions over the past year, about what this moment would feel like. She had imagined several versions of it. None of the versions had been quite this plain, quite this stripped of performance. She had been prepared for justification dressed as apology. She had not been fully prepared for the thing itself. I hear you, she said. That's all? His voice had an edge, not angry, something more complicated. What did you want? I don't know, he said. Something that indicates it reached you. It reached me, she said. And it doesn't change the terms of the alliance. And it doesn't change what I told you in the letter. And it doesn't change the fact that I have an active crisis that requires my full attention in approximately 2 hours. She held his gaze. But I hear you. And I believe you mean it. A pause. That's not nothing. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. I suppose it isn't. Stay for the coordination session, she said. Moonfang needs to be in the room. Your eastern flank is part of the defensive map, and Sira needs to talk to whoever commands your northern border garrison. Corden, he said. I'll send for him. Good. She turned toward the door. Seraphine. She stopped but didn't turn. Whatever happens with the coalition, he said, I'll fight for this, for what you've built. She was quiet for a moment. I know you will, she said. That's why I wrote back. The betrayal didn't announce itself. That was the thing about it. In retrospect, the shape was clear, the sequence logical, the motive obvious. But in the living moment, it came the way structural failures came. Not as a dramatic crack, but as a quiet wrongness, a small misalignment in something that should have been solid, noticed a half-second before the understanding of what it meant. The coordination session ended at the 9th hour of the evening. 12 people around the table. The defensive corridor plan had been revised 3 times and was now something she could look at without finding a fatal flaw, which was the best any plan achieved under these conditions. Gareth's Southern Contact, a compact alpha named Drevin, had sent formal confirmation of alliance. The numbers were better than they'd been that morning. She was reviewing the final map with Sira when Voss came in. Not the brisk, purposeful entry that meant ordinary urgency. Something slower. Something in Voss's posture that she had never seen before in 8 months, which was a quality she did not immediately have a name for, and then did. It was dread. There's a document circulating in the outer council, Voss said. I need you to see it. The document was 3 pages. Official Silvercrest administrative letterhead, her official position header, her certification mark at the bottom. She knew immediately, before reading a word of the body text, that she had not written it. The certification mark was correct. The letterhead was correct. The signature at the bottom was a very good reproduction of her hand. She read it. The document was addressed to the Iron Veil Coalition's Eastern Command. It was dated 6 weeks ago. It described, in the precise and structured language she used for official correspondence, the defensive vulnerabilities of the Northern Compact, specific garrison locations, supply route timing, the Keldor Passage's unguarded window between 3rd and 5th hour. It recommended those windows as optimal entry points for a force seeking minimal resistance. It was signed with her name and stamped with her council seal. The document that had guided the coalition's crossing at Bracken. She read it twice. She read it the way you read something you need to understand completely before you respond to, because the response needed to come from clarity and not from the thing happening in her chest, which was cold and structural. The sensation of a load-bearing wall giving way. Someone had done this. Someone in this building, with access to her letterhead and her seal and enough knowledge of her writing style to produce a passable reproduction. Someone who had been close enough, long enough, to learn those things. She set the document on the table. "Who has this?" she said. "Breswick," Voss said. "He brought it to the outer council 20 minutes ago. He's calling for an emergency session." A pause. "Seraphine, he's calling for your removal pending investigation." She looked at the document. "Where did he get it?" she said. "He says it was delivered to him anonymously through the council post, sealed, no sender." She picked the document up again and looked at the seal. Her council seal. She kept it in her office desk, second drawer, under the supply ledger. Not locked, because the administrative building had controlled access, and she had never believed she needed the secondary precaution. She had been wrong about what she needed. "Call Breswick's session," she said. Voss stared at her. "Seraphine, call it," she said. "I want to be in the room." The emergency council met at the 10th hour. 11 members. Aldrich Vane at the head, looking like a man of 73 who had been handed a problem he had not anticipated and was handling the weight of it by being very still. Breswick stood when she entered, which was the council's formal position for a proceeding. She sat in the designated chair without being asked and looked at the document on the table in front of her, which was a copy. Breswick had distributed copies, of course, because Breswick was thorough. "Chief Counsel Ashmore," Breswick said. "The title, precise, the way you use a title when you're about to challenge the person holding it. This document was delivered to my office. I am required by compact procedure to present material of this nature to the full council." "I know the procedure," she said. "Show me the envelope." He had it. She examined the exterior. Council post routing stamps, 2 of them, each legitimate. The inner seal, not her personal seal, but the administrative building's general distribution wax, applied cleanly. She handed it back. "I didn't write that document," she said. The seal was taken from my office," she said. "My office has controlled building access but not locked internal storage. Someone with regular access to this building used my letterhead and reproduced my signature." She kept her voice level. "This is a fabrication designed to be found at a specific moment, today, when the compact has just activated, when Moonfang has just aligned, when the coalition is looking for a way to fracture the coordination structure without a direct military confrontation." "Those are claims," Breswick said. The document has my name on it," she said. "That is not the same as me writing it." "You know the difference." The room was quiet. Aldrich Vane looked at the document, then at her. "If this document is genuine," he said carefully, "the compact's military framework was compromised at the source. If it is fabricated, the fabrication itself is a weapon that someone deployed today for specific reasons, with specific knowledge of our internal processes." He set his copy down. "Neither version of this is small." "No," she said. "It isn't." "Do you have any evidence of who might have—" "I have a hypothesis," she said. "I don't have evidence. Evidence takes time, and I am aware that time is exactly what's being used against me right now." She looked around the table, at Gareth, who was present as compact witness and looking at her with the concentrated attention of a man trying to determine what he actually believed, at Cress, whose face was doing the careful processing she had learned to recognize, at Kael, who sat at the far end of the table with an expression she had not seen on him before, not the controlled authority she remembered, not the eroded openness from their conversation earlier, but something colder and more focused, directed at Breswick. "What I can tell you," she said, "is that if I am removed from coordination now, the compact loses the person who built its current framework and the only one who has the full structural knowledge to implement it under active military pressure. The Coalition's Eastern Command made that calculus when they sent Lyra Vane here this morning and offered the same outcome through negotiation. She looked at Breswick. This is the second attempt at the same goal. That pattern is itself evidence. Or it's a convenient framing, Breswick said. Yes, she said. It could be. I can't prove it isn't tonight in this room. You'll have to make a judgment. She looked at him steadily. That's what councils are for. The vote was called. The question before the council was not guilt. No compact procedure established guilt in an emergency session without investigation, but whether to suspend her coordination role pending a formal inquiry. 7 members. That was the threshold. She needed 5 votes to survive the suspension. She sat while the vote was conducted in the formal open declaration method, each council member stating their position in order by seat number, so the record was unambiguous. Member 1, suspend. Member 2, no suspension. Member 3, suspend. Member 4, no suspension. Member 5, no suspension. Member 6, suspend. Member 7, no suspension. Member 8, suspend. 4 to 4. 4 remaining. Member 9 was Gareth Solon, sitting as compact witness with provisional counsel standing under the emergency activation clause she had written. He looked at the table for 3 full seconds. No suspension, he said. 5 to 4. She needed 1 more. Member 10 was a senior council elder named Wynne, 60 years in Silvercrest, who had been watching her for 8 months with the particular watchfulness of a person who makes decisions slowly and holds them permanently. He had never spoken directly against her, or for her in any session. He kept his own counsel in the way of someone who doesn't need the performance of neutrality because the neutrality was actual. He looked at the document. He looked at her. No suspension, he said. 6 to 4. The suspension failed. She breathed, slow, through her nose, not visible, but the room did not relax the way a room relaxes when a crisis resolves. It remained with the specific tension of a crisis that has been delayed, not ended. The document was still on the table. The question of who had put it there was still open. And in the eyes of 3 of the 4 members who had voted to suspend her, she could see the thing that was more dangerous than the vote itself. Doubt. Real, structural doubt. The kind that didn't evaporate because a motion failed. Doubt lived in systems. It found cracks and widened them. It didn't need to win a vote to do its work. She stood. Thank you, she said, to the room without elaboration. She picked up her copy of the document and walked out. In the corridor, she stopped. She stopped, and she stood against the wall with the document in her hand, and she let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, the full weight of what had just happened. Not the vote. She had survived the vote. The shape beneath the vote. The recognition that someone inside this structure, someone with daily access, someone who had been in proximity to her work and her desk and her seal, had spent weeks or months constructing this, had timed it precisely, had known what moment would cause maximum damage, and delivered it to that moment with accuracy. She had been here 8 months. She had trusted carefully, built slowly, maintained clear eyes about who had interests contrary to her presence. She thought she had accounted for the vectors. She had not accounted for this one. The 30 seconds ended. She pushed off the wall. The document in her hand had a detail she had not mentioned in the council session, because she had seen it in the second reading, and she was not yet certain what it meant, but she knew it was significant. The notation style in the 3rd paragraph, the way the vulnerability assessment was structured, not the language, the logic sequence, the specific order of tactical considerations. She used that order. It was her own analytical pattern. Not many people had read enough of her internal work documents to reproduce that pattern accurately. She kept most of her working drafts private. The formal outputs went through Voss, through Aldrich, through the council. But the internal process documents, the analysis drafts, the early-stage assessments, she knew who had read those. The certainty arrived with the particular coldness of something that should have been considered earlier, that would have been considered earlier if she hadn't trusted what she thought she knew, if she hadn't let familiarity become a kind of blindness. Voss appeared at the end of the corridor. "Seraphine," Voss said, Lyra Vane is gone. She left the building 20 minutes ago through the West Service access. A pause. And Fen? Fen is gone too. His room is cleared. His personal effects are gone. Seraphine was very still. Fen, she said. Not a question. A name becoming a different thing in her mouth. A name going through the recalibration of everything it had meant over 8 months against the new geometry of what it now meant. And the two versions did not survive contact with each other. And what was left was not grief exactly, though it had grief's weight, but the specific devastation of a person who thought they understood the room they were in and discovers they understood it wrong. Fen, who had come to her as a boy of 18, the son of a family she had treated in a roadside ruin in the middle country, who had sat in her outer office for 8 months and learned her patterns the way a young person learns from proximity, absorbing the rhythm of her work, the structure of her analysis, the order in which she thought, who had been given access not because she had been careless, but because she had believed in the straightforward truth of a thing she had seen with her own eyes. A family in distress, a mother who meant what she said, a boy who watched her hands while she worked with the focused attention of someone learning a skill. He had learned a skill. She thought, briefly and with a precision that was almost clinical, about what it had cost him, the calculation he had made, the timeline. He had been placed, or he had been turned, she didn't know which yet, and it mattered. And he had been patient, and he had been good at what he was doing, and she had trusted him because the origin story was real. The family in the way station had been real, and she had not asked the question that the origin story made it feel unnecessary to ask, which was, what came after? She breathed in. The compact had 6 votes in a defensive corridor, and 3 signed alliances, and 1,200 coalition troops already across the Braken River. She had an active military situation, a council with 4 members who doubted her, an unknown remaining window before the coalition's second column moved on Keldor, and a fabricated document that someone inside her own structure had spent months preparing. She had been afraid, on the night she crossed into Silvercrest, that the thing she was building would be fragile in ways she couldn't predict. She had built against fragility. She had built in redundancy and documentation and formal structures that didn't depend on any single person's presence, including her own. She had not built against this. The thing she understood now, standing in the corridor with the document in her hand and the goneness of Fen sitting in her chest like a stone, was that there was a version of herself that she had never fully inhabited. She had been deliberate and strategic and patient, and she had built well, but she had also maintained a margin of trust that felt like integrity, and may have been, in part, a refusal to become something she didn't want to be. She had chosen to believe in the way station story because she wanted it to be what it appeared. She had kept that choice even when the work required otherwise. That version of herself was not equipped for what was coming next. What came next would require her to be harder than she had allowed herself to be. Not cruel, not indifferent, but stripped of the margin, operating without the allowance for doubt that she had quietly maintained because it made her feel like herself. The compact needed her to make decisions in the next 48 hours that couldn't afford the softness of hope as a methodology. She stood in the corridor and she felt the version of herself that had walked into Silvercrest 8 months ago, and she felt the version the next 48 hours required, and she stood in the space between them for one long breath. Then she walked back toward the council room. "Find Voss," she said to the empty corridor, though she knew Voss was behind her because Voss was always behind her. "Tell her to get Kael, Gareth, and Vale's remaining contact. Tell them we meet in the map room in 15 minutes. A pause. "And tell Rowan Veldy that I need Moonfang's Eastern Garrison commander here by dawn, not by midday. Dawn." "And the Fen situation," Voss said quietly. She stopped. "The Fen situation," she said, "is information. We use the information." She kept walking. "The Coalition knows our defensive plan. That means the plan changes tonight, all of it, from the foundation. Seraphine, rebuilding the entire framework in one night. I know," she said. "Then we'd better start." She pushed open the map room door. Kael was already there, standing at the table where the defensive corridor map lay spread, studying it with the expression of someone who had already understood the problem before it was explained to him. He looked up when she entered. She met his eyes for exactly 1 second. In that second, she made a decision that she had been holding at arm's length for 8 months, not because it was wrong, but because the timing hadn't been right, and now the timing was the worst possible, which meant it was finally necessary. Everything the coalition knows, she said, they know because someone I trusted gave it to them. The defensive plan is compromised. We have until dawn to build something they've never seen. She set the document on the table, which means I need the one thing this compact doesn't have yet. What? Kyle said. A commander, she said. Someone who fights differently than I plan. Someone who can look at a broken framework and find the offensive move inside it instead of the defensive repair. She held his gaze. I built the structure. I need someone who knows how to break the enemies. The silence in the room had a different quality than all the silences before it. You're asking me, Kyle said. I'm asking Moonfang's Alpha, she said. Are those the same thing right now? He looked at her for one long moment, and in his face was the accumulated weight of 18 months of consequence, and the specific quality of a man who has been waiting, without expecting to be given it, for a way to be useful to something larger than his own survival. Yes, he said, they are. Outside, somewhere past the eastern wall, in the dark that lay between Ardenmere and the Braken River crossing, 1,200 coalition wolves were camped and waiting for the signal that their intelligence was sound, that the plan they'd been handed was good, that the woman who had built the compact had been removed or discredited and the structure she'd built had cracked at the foundation. They were going to find out they were wrong, but they weren't wrong yet. The map room smelled like tallow and cold stone, and the particular sharpness of men and women who had been awake too long and were running on the specific fuel of a situation that couldn't afford them to stop. 7 people around the table. Seraphine at the center, Kale to her left, Rowan beside him, Gareth across, with Syrah at his elbow, Voss at the door. Dunmore Vale, who had been told about his niece in the plainest terms Seraphine had available, and had received the information with the expression of a man absorbing a blow he had not anticipated but would not fall from. The coalition knows the defensive corridor plan, Seraphine said. All of it. The garrison positions, the Keldor window, the supply timing, everything I built in the past 3 months has been read and handed to the Eastern Command. She kept her voice even. Even was the only speed right now. Which means the defensive plan is a liability. We don't use it. Any unit that moves into a position defined by that plan is moving into a position the coalition has already accounted for. We scrapped 3 months of framework, Gareth said. Not a question, not a complaint. The flat acknowledgement of a man who has been in enough bad situations to know that the worst waste is arguing with the condition. We scrap it and build something they've never seen, Seraphine said. Tonight. Kyle was already looking at the map. Not at the corridor lines she had drawn, but at the terrain underneath them, the geographic truth the plan had been built on top of. She watched him do it. Watched the specific quality of attention that a man brings to a problem when the problem is his actual language, when tactics are the mode of thought rather than a skill deployed on occasion. His finger moved to the eastern ridge above the Braken crossing. They crossed at Bracken because the plan said Bracken was the most defensible point, he said, which means they came through it expecting a prepared position. And found none, Seraphine said. The outpost went dark. So they're moving cautiously now. They have intelligence, but the intelligence says there should be resistance that isn't there. That reads as a trap. He looked up. They'll slow, reassess, wait for the second column to move before committing the first column deeper. How long? Rowan said. 6 hours. Maybe 8. And the Keldor column. The plan said Keldor's window was 3rd to 5th hour, Seraphine said. They'll move at 3rd hour regardless, because the plan was specific and they trust it. She looked at Kyle. That's the window. He was already nodding. She could see him building it in real time, the mental construction of a different kind of structure than the one she built. Not administrative, not systemic, but spatial and kinetic, the architecture of force in motion. He built fast. She had known, from watching him for 5 years across a different kind of table, that he built fast. If we have anything at Keldor at 2nd hour, he said, not a garrison, a mobile unit, fast, positioned north of the passage rather than in it. We hit the second column from above while they're moving through the narrows. The narrows cancel their numbers. They can't spread. They're moving in file. How many wolves do we need for that to work? Gareth said. 60. The right 60. Kale looked at him. Can Northmere give me 60 wolves who can move without light and hold discipline under fire? I can give you 70, Gareth said. 60 is enough. 70 makes noise. Then 60. Seraphine watched the exchange and felt something she didn't have time to examine. The specific sensation of two different kinds of competence meeting and recognizing each other, the structural and the kinetic, the plan and the force that executes it, the thing she had been building and the thing she had asked him to become in this room. She had built well. She had built something that could receive this. That recognition sat inside her chest with a quiet exactness that she did not explain to anyone. The first column at break-in, she said. While they're slow and waiting for the second column to move, we need them held, not engaged, held. Something that costs them time without costing us wolves we need at Keldor. Faint, Rowan said. Small unit, high visibility. Make them think the prepared position exists after all. They'll consolidate instead of pushing. Rowan's unit, Kael said. He looked at his beta with the specific steadiness of a man assigning a task that carries real weight. 40 wolves, visible movement north of the crossing. Controlled engagement, no commitment. Understood, Rowan said, in the tone that meant he had already understood before the words were complete. Vale had been listening with the quality of someone taking inventory. What do you need from the Western Territories? He said. Seraphine looked at him. Supply line, she said. Southern approach. If the Keldor action works and the first column stalls, the combined compact force needs to consolidate within 12 hours. They'll be moving from multiple positions. They need food, water, and medical support at a single point they can reach from any direction. She looked at the map. Here. Her finger found the junction point above the southern ridge. 3 hours from Keldor, 4 from the break-in position. Defensible terrain, water source. I can have it supplied by dawn, Vale said. Have it supplied by second hour, she said. Before dawn. He nodded. She looked at the table. 7 people. 40 hours ago, she had been alone in a records room building an administrative framework. The framework had been infiltrated, fabricated against, and nearly used to decapitate the compact before it could function. What remained was this room and the people in it and the terrain on the map and the hours before the coalition moved. We go now, she said. Questions when you're in position, not here. The room moved. Thumbed. She did not sleep. She had not slept since the previous morning, and she did not have the option of sleep now, and the body adjusted. Not well. The adjustment was imperfect, the kind that ran on stress chemistry and produced in the corners of the eyes a gritty sharpness that was not clarity but felt adjacent to it, good enough for the work. She moved to the forward command position Sierra had established on the ridge above the junction point, 3 hours south of Keldor, 2 hours from the break-in crossing if you moved fast. The ridge gave a partial sightline to the eastern approach and a full sightline to the supply camp Vale's people were building below in the dark, methodical and quiet. Voss had stayed in Ardenmere to manage the council, which meant managing Breswick, which Seraphine had given her specific and precise instructions for. Don't fight him, she had said. Let him think the suspension question is still open. He needs to feel like he's winning something or he becomes unpredictable. When this is over, the document will be investigated and he'll have the results he needs to be satisfied. Until then, let him have the feeling of momentum. Voss had looked at her with the expression she wore when she thought something was managing rather than solving. I know, Seraphine had said. There's a difference. Right now, I need managing. Solving comes after. Voss had gone back to the city. On the ridge, in the dark, at the second hour of the morning, Seraphine stood at the edge of the tree line and looked east and thought about Fen. Not for long. She didn't have long. But she gave it what it deserved, which was a few minutes of actual consideration rather than the practiced detachment she had been applying to it in the council room and the map room, because practiced detachment was a tool, not a truth. She had believed in him because the origin story was real, and she had let the reality of the origin function as a guarantee of the person. That was a mistake. Not naive. She had considered the possibility of manipulation from other directions, had built documentation practices and procedural redundancy against a dozen different forms of infiltration. She had not considered that someone would plant the infiltration in the moment that looked most like genuine chance, in a roadside way station in the middle country, in a sick man and a tired woman and two children, and a small authentic act of care that she had been trained by exile to believe was the kind of thing that still existed in the world. She understood something about herself at the edge of that tree line that she had been half aware of for years. She was not as hard as the work required. She had made herself hard enough to survive, hard enough to build, hard enough to walk away from everything she'd known without breaking. But in the interior, in the private core of the mechanism, she still believed in the roadside story. She still believed that the genuine thing was genuine and that it proved something. The world she was operating in did not reward that belief with safety. The world she was operating in required her to hold the belief and work anyway, without the expectation that the belief would protect her. That was the actual hardness, not the absence of trust. Trust with open eyes and no protection. She breathed in the cold mountain air. She turned back to the map. Kael's 60 wolves hit the Keldor column at the third hour. She heard it from the ridge, not the individual sounds, the distance was too great, but the low reverberation of a large force in controlled engagement, the sound waves traveling through cold air with a particularity that experienced ears knew to read. It had started. The tactical channel runner arrived 9 minutes later, a compact warrior named Bren who had been running messages between positions all night with the focused economy of a young person who understood that their one job was speed and accuracy and that everything else was noise. First contact established, Bren said. Commander Draven reports the column is in the Narrows. 60 wolves in position north of the passage. Engagement on his signal. Second column status, she said. Roan's unit has them consolidated at Braken. They're not moving. Commander Veld reports heavy defensive posturing. They think there's a prepared position and they're waiting for the second column before pushing. She looked at Syrah. It's working. For now, Syrah said, in the tone of someone who had survived enough plans going right to maintain appropriate skepticism. For now is enough, Seraphine said. Keep the channel open. The next hour was the particular kind of waiting that was not passive. She was tracking 6 simultaneous information streams, adjusting the supply position twice based on incoming terrain reports, sending 2 directive corrections to Gareth's reserve unit that had moved 6 degrees off the planned consolidation approach. She worked by firelight at a field table that was a board across 2 supply crates, and the cold came through her jacket and she didn't notice it. At the 4th hour, the runner came back. Commander Draven sends, Bren said, slightly less composed than before, which told her something had changed. The Keldor column has broken from the Narrows. They pushed through faster than projected. They had a rear flank unit that wasn't in the original intelligence. She was very still. How far out of the Narrows? 200 yards and moving. 200 yards out of the Narrows meant numbers active. 60 wolves against a column of 400 with room to spread. Where is Commander Draven now? She said, holding the ridgeline. He says he can maintain for 30 minutes. After that, Bren stopped. After that, the numbers win, she said. Get Gareth's reserve on the move. Direct approach to the Keldor Ridge, fastest route. No cover consideration. She was already moving to the tactical map. Tell Commander Draven 30 minutes and reinforcement arrives. The reserve is 40 minutes out at best speed, Syrah said quietly. Seraphine looked at the map. Then we need to make 30 minutes possible, she said. She looked at the assembled position, the forward command, the supply camp below, the 18 wolves Voss had assigned as command position security. She looked at Syrah. I need 12 wolves and I need them ready to move in 4 minutes, she said. Syrah's face did the thing it did when she was running a fast assessment. You're going to the ridge. Someone needs to hold Kyle's flank until Gareth arrives, she said. I know the terrain. I built the maps. You're the compact's coordinator, Syrah said. If you go into that field, if the Keldor Ridge fails, the break-in column moves and we lose the consolidation point and the campaign ends tonight, Seraphine said. I'm aware of the risk calculation. She held Syrah's gaze. 4 minutes. Syrah got her 12 wolves. She had not fought an open field engagement since her early years before the Moonfang Bond, and the body's memory of that work came back not as a choice, but as a physical fact. The reacquaintance of muscles with a specific kind of demand, the recalibration of breath and pace, and the management of fear, which was not an absence of sensation, but a redirection of it, channeled from the chest into the legs, into the hands, into the forward movement that turned fear from paralysis into fuel. She came over the ridge at the 4th hour and 20 minutes, and she saw it. 60 wolves holding a line that was too long for 60 wolves, spread across the upper ridge with the disciplined spacing of experienced fighters who knew they were outnumbered and were managing the disadvantage by making every position count double. The coalition column was below and spreading laterally, probing for the ends of the line, looking for the gap that numbers always eventually found. And at the center of the line, moving between positions with the specific quality of a commander whose presence functions as a structural element, not directing from a distance but physically there, in the line, absorbing the pressure that would have broken a less solid center, was Kael. She had time for exactly 1 second of observation before she was in it. She took the left end of the line with her 12 wolves and the gap that had been opening in that corner closed, and the coalition unit probing it met unexpected resistance and pulled back to reassess, and that reassessment cost them 4 minutes that the line needed. She fought the way she had been trained and forgotten and retrained by necessity, not with the elegance that people ascribe to the story later, because nothing that happened in the next 22 minutes was elegant. It was all grit and ground and the basic animal work of not giving the inch that lost the position. She took a hit to the left shoulder on the 8th minute from a coalition wolf who was faster than she'd accounted for, and she staggered, and she didn't go down, and she moved back into position before the gap opened. The shoulder burned in a way that was information she noted and filed and did not spend time on. At the 12th minute, Kael reached her position. Not retreating, moving, the way a commander moves to the pressure point when the pressure point shifts. He came in on her left, the injured side, without being told, and she understood he had seen the hit and had done the geometry. "How bad?" he said. "Standing," she said. "That's not what I asked." "It's the relevant answer," she said. "Hold this end. Gareth is 18 minutes out." "You need to move back from the line." "I need Gareth to arrive and the line to be there when he does," she said. "Those are the same as me staying." He looked at her for 1 second in the way of a man who knows the argument is lost and knows why it's lost and makes the decision to be where he is needed instead of where he wants to be. He turned and held the left end beside her, and they didn't speak again for 14 minutes. The coalition unit hit the center line hard at the 18th minute. She heard it. The sound of a line under maximum pressure, the specific pitch of engagement where the numbers were doing their work, and the only answer was to be harder than the numbers. She heard the center flex, and she heard it hold, and she understood that it held because the person at the center of it had decided it would hold, had made that decision somewhere earlier in the night, and was simply executing it 1 minute at a time. She had been wrong about a lot of things. She had been wrong about Fen, and wrong about the document, and wrong about how much time she had. But she had not been wrong about what she'd said to Kael in the map room. That she needed the thing he knew how to do, the offensive move inside the broken framework. She had been right about that with a precision that the next 14 minutes was making plain. Gareth's wolves came over the southern ridge at the 23rd minute. Not the 30 she had requested, not the 40 Syrah had calculated. 23. She learned later that Gareth had pushed the reserve at a pace that would have broken the units if the run had been 5 minutes longer. He had looked at the terrain and the timing and made the decision that 23 minutes at that speed was worth the cost. She filed that information in the same place she filed everything she needed to know about who the people around her actually were when the situation was terminal. The arrival of Gareth's force changed the geometry the way the arrival of any sufficient force changes it, not gradually, but immediately. The coalition unit's calculation shifting in the span of 30 seconds, from we have the numbers to we no longer have the numbers, and everything that followed from that shift. The probing stopped. The column began to contract. She kept the left end of the line through the contraction, through the coalition unit's organized withdrawal back toward the Narrows, through the 20 minutes it took for the field to arrive at the particular stillness of an engagement that has ended. Then she let herself stop. She sat down on a piece of ridge rock with her back against the slope and her left arm at her side, and she breathed. Slow. In. Out. The shoulder was bad enough to require attention, but not bad enough to have compromised the function, which was the only assessment that mattered right now. Around her the line was standing down, wolves moving to the tending of their wounded, the field reorganization that followed every engagement. Kael crouched in front of her. He had blood on his jaw from something that wasn't his own. She could tell by the way he was holding himself that he wasn't carrying a significant wound, and his eyes had the quality they had in the map room, that focused steadiness that she had never fully stopped finding legible. "The break-in column," she said. "Roan reports they're pulling back," he said. "The second column's withdrawal signaled them. They're not committed to the crossing." He held her gaze. "It's over for tonight." "Tonight," she said. "Tonight," he confirmed. "The coalition hasn't committed everything. This was the opening movement." "I know," she said. "But we held it." "We held it," he said. She looked at the ridge. The sky was going from black to the particular dark blue that came before gray, the sky doing what it did every morning without any opinion about what had happened underneath it. She thought about the compact, about the document signed and the framework built, and the 6 votes that had kept her in the coordination role, and the document that was still sitting on a council table with her name on it that she hadn't written. She thought about Fenn, somewhere east of here, carrying what he had done in whatever configuration of justification or regret or calculation a person carried something like that. She thought about Mira, who still had her cedar chest. She thought about a roadside way station in the middle country and the decision she had made to stop and use her hands on a stranger's fever, and whether that decision had been the origin of the thing that had almost cost her everything, or whether it had been entirely separate, the coincidence weaponized after the fact by someone who had been looking for a vector. She did not know which. She might never know. Kael was still in front of her. "I need medical attention," she said. "And then I need to get back to Ardenmere." "I know," he said. "Kael." She looked at him. The ridge light was very clear and flat and honest in the way of early morning, and she let herself see what was in his face and let him see what was in hers for exactly the length of time the moment could hold before it became something other than what it was. "You held the center." "You held the left end with a hit shoulder and 12 wolves," he said. "I had 12 wolves," she said. "You had 60 and a larger problem. Not a competition." "No," she said, "it isn't." He stayed where he was for one more moment. His jaw was set in the way it had always set when he was about to say something he'd spent a long time deciding to say, and she recognized it the same way she had recognized his footfall in the corridor, with the body's involuntary accuracy. "I want to help you finish this," he said. "Not for Moonfang. For what you're building." A pause. "However you'll have it." She looked at him. She thought about what she had realized at the edge of the tree line before the engagement. Trust with open eyes, no protection. Not the absence of belief, but belief without the expectation of safety. She had built something in Silvercrest that was larger than anything she had imagined from the roadside position of one woman with 1 pack and 8 months of borrowed credibility. She had built it from first principles, and she had built it in the middle of being fabricated against and doubted and tested by the specific brutality of a situation that did not care about her personal history. What she was building was not finished. What the coalition had deployed tonight was not their full force. And the voice in the council, back in Ardenmere, that had voted to suspend her and had distributed copies of a document before any investigation, that voice had not gone silent because the vote had failed. She stood. The shoulder pulled hard and she breathed through it. "Come back to Ardenmere," she said. "Stay for the council session at dawn. What you did tonight on this ridge has value in that room, and I need every piece of credibility the compact can hold." She met his eyes one more time. "After that, we'll see." "After that," he said, like a man who has accepted terms he didn't choose and is choosing to honor anyway. She started down the ridge. Behind her, the sky was going gray, and the compound army was sorting itself from the field, and somewhere to the east, past the Breakin Crossing and the Keldor Narrows, the coalition's first engagement had ended in a withdrawal that told their eastern command something critical. The compact had held, the coordinator was still in position, and the plan their source had given them had not broken the structure it was designed to break. The Eastern Command would not send a representative next time. They would send the rest of the army. Seraphine came off the ridge and walked toward the supply camp and the road back to Ardenmere, and she was thinking about the next 48 hours the way she always thought about the next move, clearly forward from first principles. She was thinking about the Council and Breswick and the document investigation and the 3 alliance pacts who needed to hold and the succession framework that still had one unsigned clause and the Eastern Command's remaining columns that had not yet crossed any border. She was not thinking about Kael, walking 6 feet behind her. Or rather, she was thinking about him the way she thought about everything she had built and everything she was still building, which was to say, with clear eyes, open hands, and the specific kind of trust that no longer came with the expectation of being protected. Inside the supply camp, Vale was waiting. He handed her a message that had arrived through Ardenmere's official channel in the past hour. She read it. Her hands went still. The message was from Breswick, timed at the 3rd hour of the morning, while she was on the ridge, while the Keldor engagement was running, sent not to her but to the full council body, all 11 members, with the formal citation header that meant it was a legal instrument, not correspondence. It was a motion, not to suspend her, not to investigate the document, a motion to dissolve the emergency compact activation entirely on grounds that the Chief Administrative Council's position was compromised, and to submit Silvercrest's formal neutrality declaration to the Iron Veil Coalition's Eastern Command within the day. A neutrality declaration required 8 votes. He had the signatures of 6 council members already attached to the motion. 6. He needed 2 more. Seraphine stood in the supply camp with the message in her hand and the sky going fully gray above the eastern ridge and the sounds of the compact army sorting itself around her, and she did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was very clear. Breswick had been working this for longer than one night. The document, the distribution, the emergency session, those had been the distraction. This had been the purpose. While she was on the ridge holding the line, someone had been moving through the council body she had built her coordination structure on, collecting names. 6 signatures. 2 council members who had voted against suspension had signed a dissolution motion before the engagement was finished. She needed to know which 2. She needed to be in Ardenmere in the next 3 hours. She needed to walk into that council with a counter-argument that could move 2 people who had already decided in the dark of the morning that survival looked like neutrality. She folded the message. She looked at Vale. "How fast can you get me to Ardenmere?" she said. 2 hours, he said. "If we move now." She looked back at the ridge, at the field below it where Kael was walking toward her with Roan beside him, reading something in her posture from 60 yards away, the way a person reads something they have learned to read across distance. 2 hours. The council session was at dawn. Dawn was in 2 hours and 15 minutes. She made it in 1 hour and 58 minutes. Vale's horses were good, and the road was clear, and she did not speak during the ride, which Vale understood and honored, and Kael rode beside her in the same silence, and the sky went from gray to the pale thin gold of early morning, and Ardenmere's walls came into view with 11 minutes to spare before the session was called. She went directly to the council hall. She did not stop to change clothes. She did not stop to have the shoulder dressed, though the field bandage Roan had applied on the ridge was showing through her jacket, and 2 of the council members who saw her enter registered it with visible discomfort. She let them register it. She was past managing the optics of her appearance. What she looked like was a woman who had spent the night on a ridge holding a line, while someone in this building had been collecting signatures to dissolve the thing she'd built. And that was exactly what she was, and she was not going to soften it. Breswick was already seated. He looked at her when she entered, and something moved in his face. Not guilt. She had never credited him with guilt as a primary emotion, but a recalibration, the expression of a man who had expected more time. She sat down. Kael took the compact witness chair without being directed to it. Rowan stood at the wall. Vale sat beside Gareth, and the room had 14 people in it instead of 11, which Breswick noted with the particular attention of a man counting votes. "The motion was filed at the 3rd hour, Breswick said to the room. "Under compact procedure, it requires a response from the Chief Counsel before the vote is called." I know the procedure, Seraphine said. I wrote most of it. She looked at the motion document on the table in front of her. 6 signatures. She had identified the 2 during the ride, not by certainty, by probability, by the careful observation of 8 months compressed into a 2-hour calculation. Members Aldis and Pren, both of whom had voted against suspension, but whose interests were most exposed to coalition retaliation if the compact held and the campaign extended. They had made a rational calculation from a position of fear. She understood the calculation. She did not agree with it. Before I respond to the motion, she said, I want to know who in this room received communication from the Coalition's Eastern Command in the last 12 hours. Not as an accusation, as information I need to do my job. She looked at the table. If someone received a communication and it shaped their decision on this motion, I need to know the terms that were offered, because I have been in the field all night holding the line against the same force that is apparently also negotiating in this room, and I would like the full picture. The silence was very specific. Member Aldis looked at his hands. Seraphine waited. A letter arrived, Aldis said, finally, through the council post. Last night. He did not look up. It said that if Silvercrest submitted the neutrality declaration before dawn, the coalition would guarantee the compact members' territorial integrity. No pack loses ground. The campaign continues only against the northern packs who have already been designated as the dispute parties. And you believe that guarantee, she said. He looked up. I have a pack. I have people. I know you do, she said. She kept her voice even. Not cold, she was past cold, past performed authority. She was speaking from something deeper and more tired and more true. So does every person who signed the compact this week. So does Dunmore Vale, who broke from a structure he spent 40 years inside because he decided his granddaughter deserved a different world. So does Gareth, who pushed his reserve to a 23-minute arrival last night because 60 wolves on a ridge needed them. She looked at Aldis and then at Pren. The coalition's guarantee is worth exactly as much as the document they fabricated and circulated with my name on it, which is to say it is paper with official marks on it that means whatever it needs to mean at the moment, they need it to mean something different. Pren said quietly, We can't fight a full coalition mobilization. No, she said. We can't. Not head to head, not with the numbers as they stand. She paused. We don't have to. The coalition's Eastern Command sent its opening force, and it lost the Keldor Narrows, and the break-in column held at the crossing and pulled back. They have more force in reserve. I know that. I've said that. I'm not pretending otherwise. But what they also have now is a compact that held on the first night under conditions designed to break it before it could function. That changes the calculation. She looked around the table. A coalition that believed it could win this decisively doesn't send a political representative and a fabricated document before the first engagement. It just moves. They moved politically because they understood this compact was a structural threat to their campaign. They were right. A pause. Dissolving it now doesn't buy peace. It tells every alpha in this territory that the Silvercrest compact collapsed under the first pressure it encountered. And it tells the coalition that political manipulation is cheaper than military commitment, so they use it again, against every pack that remains. The room was quiet. Breswick said, You're asking these members to accept significant risk on your judgment. I'm asking them to accept significant risk on the evidence, she said. My judgment is that the evidence points one direction. They can disagree with my judgment. They can't change what happened last night on the Keldor Ridge. She looked at Breswick. You filed this motion at the 3rd hour of the morning while the compact's combined forces were in active engagement. I want to ask you, directly and on record, whether you were in contact with the coalition's Eastern Command before you filed it. The room went very still. Breswick held her gaze. His face was controlled in the way of someone who has been in political rooms for a long time and knows how to manage the surface. But beneath the management, she could see the thing that political experience never fully covered, which was the knowledge of being accurately seen. I filed the motion because the compact's coordinator is operating under an active credibility investigation, he said. That is a legitimate procedural ground. It is, she said, and you haven't answered my question. Another silence. No, he said. I was not in contact with the coalition. She looked at him for one more second. She believed him, and the belief was more uncomfortable than disbelief would have been, because it meant what he had done came from his own calculation rather than someone else's instruction, which made it a Silvercrest problem and not a coalition problem, and Silvercrest problems were her responsibility. Then we have a different conversation to have, she said. After the vote. She looked at the table, all 11 members, plus the compact witnesses. Call the motion, she said. Bess. The vote was 8-3 against dissolution. Aldous and Pren voted with the majority. She had not expected that, and she let herself feel the surprise of it, brief and clean. Before she filed it in the place, she filed things that required later examination. Breswick and 2 others voted for. The motion failed. She did not celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate in a vote that should not have required holding, on a motion that should not have been filed, in a night that should not have ended with a fabricated document and 1,200 coalition wolves at the Braken Crossing. What she felt was the specific exhaustion of a person who has been right about something important and knows that being right did not prevent the cost of the fight. After the session cleared, she sat in the empty council room for a few minutes. Not long. The shoulder needed dressing, and she had 3 coordination meetings before midday and a coalition investigation framework to initiate through proper channels, because the Eastern Command would recalibrate and move again, and the next move would be larger, and she needed the compact, coherent, and functional before it arrived. But she sat for a few minutes with her hands flat on the table and looked at the room. 8 months ago, she had walked into Ardenmere with a pack on her back and a cedar chest she had left behind, and a promise she had made to herself under a pine tree in the dark. She had promised to build from first principles, to build what she actually was, not what someone else had decided she should be. She looked at the signed compact documents on the table, at the dissolution motion that had failed, at the chair where Aldrich Vane sat every session with his measured patience and his 50 years of understanding what governing actually cost. She had built this. It had been infiltrated and tested and nearly dissolved twice in 24 hours, and it had held. Not because she had prevented every attack. She hadn't. She had been wrong about Fen and wrong about her seal and wrong about how much time she had, and the compact had held anyway because she had built it with enough structural redundancy that the attacks had found resistance from multiple directions simultaneously. You did not build for the good conditions. You built for the moment the conditions failed, and then you found out what the building actually was. She knew what this building was now. She stood. Kael was waiting in the outer corridor, not pacing, standing, with his back against the wall and his arms at his sides, the posture of a man who has decided to be in a place and is being in it without performing the waiting. He looked at her when she came out and did not say anything immediately, which she had always appreciated about him, in the years before she had needed to stop appreciating things about him. Breswick, he said. Breswick is a Silvercrest problem, she said. He works within the structure. He pushes at the boundaries of the structure. That's different from what Fen did, what Lyra did. I can work with Breswick. She paused. I'll need to build him a different kind of stake in the compact's success. Give him a real role in the investigation framework. Let him be the one who finds what the coalition tried to do. He'll defend what he helped uncover. Kael looked at her. You're not angry at him. I don't have the time or the use for that kind of anger, she said. I'm angry at the coalition's Eastern Command. That anger has a productive application. Breswick's just a man trying to survive in a situation that scared him. He was quiet for a moment. You're going to spend the rest of your life in this, he said. Not critically. Something more like recognition. This is what you are. Yes, she said. Is that what you wanted? She thought about it. Actually thought about it, which she didn't always do when people asked her things she had previously decided. I wanted to build something that lasted, she said. I wanted to prove to myself that what I knew how to do was real and not borrowed from someone else's authority. She looked at the corridor wall. I didn't know it would be this. I knew it would be something. A pause. This is good work. It matters. The people in the compact are real people with real packs, and the thing they're being asked to hold is worth holding. She looked at him. Yes, it's what I wanted. He nodded. The nod of a man receiving an answer he needed to hear clearly, not because it was the answer he would have chosen, but because clarity was more honest than comfort. "I'm going back to Moonfang," he said. "Cordon needs direction, and the eastern flank needs actual preparation, not the framework version. I'll coordinate with Sierra on the northern corridor adjustment." He paused. "Roan will stay as Moonfang's formal compact liaison. He'll be more useful to you here than I will." "He will," she agreed. "Seraphine." He said her name the way he had said it in the East receiving room, with the same weight. I know I don't have the right to ask for what I'm going to ask for." "Then say it, and I'll tell you whether that's true." He looked at her for a long moment. "When this is over, when the coalition is handled and the compact is stable and the succession framework is signed and you've built everything you're building, I would like one conversation, not about the alliance, not about Moonfang's position, about the 5 years that ended the way they ended and what I owe you for that." He held her eyes. "Not to restore anything, not to ask for anything. I just want to say the rest of it, someday when the rest of it has a room to be set in." She looked at him. The thing that moved through her was not love, and was not its absence, but was something older and more complicated. The accumulated weight of two people who had been significant to each other in a way that damage hadn't erased, only altered, the way a healed fracture alters bone without removing its function. She did not want him back. She had built a life that did not require him and did not have a shaped space in it waiting for him to return. That was true, and she knew it to be true with the same certainty she knew the compact documents were valid. And he had stood at the center of a line for 22 minutes on a cold ridge with 60 wolves against 400, and he had held it. Not for her, for what she had built, because he had decided it was worth holding. People were the full sum of what they did, not the edited version. The decision 5 years ago was real, so was last night. "When this is over," she said, "come find me. We'll have the conversation." Not a promise of restoration. A promise that the door was not locked from her side. Those were different things, and he knew the difference, and she could see that he knew it, and he accepted the terms the way he had accepted the terms of the alliance, not as what he would have chosen, but as what was true, and therefore the only honest place to stand. He left at midday. She watched him cross the Ardenmere Square from the second-floor window of the administrative building, Roan at his side for the first 100 yards, and then staying as Kael continued toward the east gate. He walked the way he always walked, with the weight of a man who had made a decision and was living in its direction. She watched until he passed through the gate and the gate closed and the square went back to its ordinary morning. Then she turned back to her desk. The coalition's formal withdrawal came 6 weeks later, not because they lacked force. They had force enough. They withdrew because the compact had held through 2 more engagement attempts, both smaller than the first, both finding a structure that had learned from each previous contact and adjusted, and because 4 additional packs had formally requested compact membership in the weeks following the Keldor engagement, and because the Eastern Command understood, with the clarity of military professionals looking at a changed map, that the territory they had planned to move through had reorganized itself around a center that was not going to fracture under the pressure model they had deployed. The formal withdrawal document was signed in Ardenmere's main hall. Seraphine signed for Silvercrest. The coalition's representative, not Lyra, a different envoy, older, more senior, signed for the Eastern Command with the particular expression of a man completing a transaction he had expected to complete under different conditions. The hall was full. Every compact member had sent a representative. Aldrich Vane sat at the head of the table, and his face had the quality it sometimes had, the quality of a man looking at something he had hoped to see and had prepared himself not to count on. After the signing, the hall emptied gradually, the way it does when the formal business ends and people need to move toward the ordinary work of the next thing. Seraphine stayed at the table for a few minutes, sorting the documents into their proper order, the small, precise work that followed every large event. Voss sat down beside her. "The succession framework has its 4th signature," Voss said. "I know. I saw the filing this morning. That's all 5 required." A pause. "Seraphine, the succession framework is complete. The trade compact is resolved. The coalition has withdrawn. The compact has 8 member packs." Another pause. "You finished it." Seraphine looked at the documents in her hands. She thought about the pine tree. The night she had sat against the trunk and felt the door close behind her from her own hand and made a promise she had kept. She thought about the way station and Darius and the things she had believed and been wrong about and would probably believe again in some future version, because the alternative to believing the roadside story was to become someone who didn't stop at roadside way stations, and that person could not have built what she had built. You could not construct a compact from pure skepticism. You needed the belief in the roadside story. You just needed also to know that the story had limits. She thought about Kyle on the ridge. She thought about Breswick, who was currently leading the investigation into the fabricated document, and had, last week, sent her a formal memo that was the closest his temperament could produce to an apology, which was a detailed analytical summary of the document's fabrication methods that conclusively established she had not written it, delivered without ceremony, filed in the official record. She thought about Mira, who had sent a letter 3 months ago from Moonfang, saying she had been promoted to senior household coordinator, saying the cedar chest was safe, saying, in the careful and slightly formal language of a young woman who was learning to express herself in writing, that she thought about what Seraphine had told her on the day she left. Don't perform smallness to make other people comfortable. Seraphine had read the letter twice and then written back, 1 page, in the same careful language, and had said, I see you doing it already. Keep going. What happens now? Voss said. Seraphine set the documents down, looked at the main hall, empty now, the long table and the chairs and the walls that held the compact's founding records in their formal cases. Now we build the next part, she said. Which is? The part that makes this last past us, she said. The training framework for compact governance. The succession pipeline that doesn't depend on any single person's presence, including mine. The Eastern Corridor economic agreements that give the border packs something to protect besides their pride. She looked at Voss. The work that a crisis doesn't produce. The ordinary work. Voss looked at her for a moment with the expression that was the closest Voss came to warmth, which was a kind of direct and unsentimental recognition. You know, Voss said, when you walked in here with a pack and a compass and whatever you'd been carrying for 8 months, I thought you were going to be useful for maybe 6 months before the council found a reason to formalize you out. I know, Seraphine said. I was wrong. You were cautious, Seraphine said. That's different. Voss almost smiled. I'll set up the governance training meetings for next week. Tuesday, Seraphine said. Not Monday. Let the compact members have Monday to finish processing the withdrawal. Voss left. Seraphine sat alone in the main hall for a few minutes more. Outside, through the tall windows, Ardenmere was going about its afternoon with the ordinary purposefulness of a city that had made it through something and was now, correctly, focused on the next thing. She could hear the square, cartwheels, voices, the sound of an argument starting and resolving in the way of 2 people who would be having lunch together an hour later. She had not won anything. That was the thing about the kind of work she did. There was no winning, only the construction of conditions in which the people inside them had more possibility than they had before, and the maintenance of those conditions against the pressure that always, eventually, arrived. That was the work. That would always be the work. She thought about what Kyle had said in the corridor. This is what you are. Yes. This was what she was. Not the exile, not the former Luna, not the woman who had walked through a gate with a pack and a promise and a shallow-heeled wound to her pride. All of those things had been necessary. All of them had cost something real. But the through line of all of it, the thing that had been true in Moonfang's map rooms and in the Silvercrest archive and on the Keldor Ridge and at this table today, was not what she had survived. It was what she had built inside the survival. You did not require the exile to have been just in order to use it. The unjust things happened and left their marks, and the marks were real, and what you chose to do with them was the only part that was yours. She picked up the compact documents. She carried them to the filing room, placed them in their ordered case, pressed the lock. She went back to work. Outside, the ordinary afternoon continued, and the compact held, and the territory that had been moving toward fracture had found instead a different kind of structure, imperfect, contested, requiring constant tending, built on the accumulated decisions of people who had been afraid and done it anyway, And in the administrative building at the center of Ardenmere, the chief counsel of the Silvercrest Compact sat at her desk in the early evening light and began, with the same small, precise hand she had always used, the first page of the next framework. Not because the crisis was over, because the work was not.